Welcome to another NMRAx. Whether it's the morning, the evening, the afternoon, or as it is here, the middle of the night. It's midnight here at the moment, so I thought I'd jump in here and have a chat to Jacob and welcome him along. He's come to host our first series of clinics, and I shall be back, I believe, round about 7 o'clock if the admin people have told me right. And I'll go through the last four clinics, but we've got 8 clinics tonight. So we're going to do the first 4 hours, then we're going to have a break, and then we'll be back at in the morning, Australian time at 7 a.m., and we'll be taking off from there. I don't have the schedule actually in front of me with the times for Eastern, but never mind. My computer's on the blink here at the moment. But anyway, Jacob, how are you? Welcome back.
I'm doing pretty good.
I understand you're on holidays at the moment.
So today, our first presenter from... yes, I am.
You're on holidays at the moment, and you're in the Bay Area, and I believe you've had 3 days of layout tours. Who have you been seeing?
I've been to Jim Providence's layout, Paul Weiss's beautiful Central Vermont layout, Jack Burgess's Yosemite Valley, and a plethora of others.
Great. Anyway, Jacob's taking time out. He's on holidays. He's originally he's from the Washington State area, so he's down the coast a little bit. But I'll hand it over to Jacob, and I shall catch everybody else early in the morning. So take it away, Jacob.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Our first presenter today is from the Gateway Division of the NMRA, having presented 5 premieres. He holds degrees in mechanical engineering and computer science, and particularly enjoys the technical aspects of model railroading, including 3D printing and Arduino animation. With a warm welcome to Dave.
Well, thank you, Jacob. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. This clinic is going to be on 3D printing, specifically a new way to make models. I think right now the penetration of 3D printers among model railroaders is between 7, or maybe 5 and 10%. So if you all are in that 90 to 95% region right now, this clinic may be a little bit different, but hopefully, even if you don't have 3D printing equipment or haven't tried it yet, when the time comes, and it will, you're going to remember this clinic and know that maybe there's a different way to create 3D models, particularly for structures, than the traditional ways of Fusion, SketchUp, that type of thing. So this clinic's going to be a video, and we're going to run about 30 minutes on it, and then we'll take some Q&A. But for the 5 to 10% of you who are into 3D printing so far, particularly for structures, I think you'll find this interesting because there's always another way. So if we could roll the video, I'll be back in about 30 minutes and we'll take some question and answers. Let's roll. Hello, I am Dave Ackman of the Gateway Division of the National Model Railroad Association, and I'd like to welcome you to this seminar on automating computer-aided design for 3D printing of model railroad structures using a technique I call generators. Model railroading is fun, and creating 3D printed objects for model railroading structures is a lot of fun. But learning how to create 3D models with computer-aided design software, also known as CAD, is not fun. It's frustrating. CAD software is complex and requires a level of manual dexterity and patience that few of us have. But when it comes to creating components for model railroad structures, there can be other ways. Today we are going to explore how we can use personal computer programs I call generators to fill out forms and generate 3D models to our specifications. We are going to automate the CAD process for model railroad structures. I promise to show you how to download these generator tools for free and not to make you learn a bunch of programming mumbo-jumbo. Scout's honor. Here are some of the structures that you are going to learn to create. Here is an A-frame cottage. You are going to learn how to create shake shingles, the foundation, and deck. Could your layout use a log cabin or a hunting lodge? A generator can help you create one. Here is a freight house with board and batten siding, scalloped roofing, and a loading dock. And speaking of docks, would you like a place to do a bit of fishing or park your boat? Do you wish there was a way you could design your own custom windows? There is a way to do that too. So, how do we do that? We start by visiting my website at http://dackm.github.io and scrolling down to the Automating CAD Clinic. After a brief explanation of the concept, a sample of a generator screen appears, this one for creating shake shingles. The screen consists of fields in which you enter configuration values and make option selections. Further down, we see what the resulting model looks like. Finally, we come to a table showing all of the generator programs I have created, along with some I plan on creating in the future. Once you find a generator program of interest, just click on the link to download the file. A download screen appears, and you click on the download button at the right. An exe file will be transferred to your download folder. When you launch the program, a design screen appears. You enter the parameters of a design you would like to create. Here we have the generator for a basic building. You can create a building with flat walls, clapboard siding, logs, or boards and battens. We specify the size of the building and the roof line. For a log cabin, we specify the diameter of the logs we wish to use, how closely we wish to overlap adjacent logs, how to offset the corners, and then we click on the green button to generate the specifications for the model. No doors or windows in the structure just yet, but we will cover that shortly. Notice that I did not say we are going to create the actual model, but are creating the specifications for a model. To go that final step, I'd like to introduce you to a CAD package you may not have heard of, called OpenSCAD. OpenSCAD is a free package in which you use a programming language to describe a model you wish to create. You can download a copy of OpenSCAD from http://www.openscad.org and follow the installation instructions. The language is a bit complex, but I learned how to use it, and my generators take your specifications and produce OpenSCAD input files for you. All you need to do is load the generator files into OpenSCAD, render them with the F6 key, and save them as a stereolithography file, a 3D model. You then have a model you can print immediately or enhance further with a traditional CAD package. I have done all the programming for you. All you need to do is design, convert, print, and enjoy. Did you get all that? Okay, it was kind of fast, so let's go over the theory once more. But remember, there is a handout on my website with all the details in writing. We start at http://dackm.github.io, go to the Automating CAD section, click on a generator we would like to try, and download it. If Windows Defender objects, we click on More Info, and then Run Anyway. I run Malwarebytes and Windows Defender, so I am doubly protected from viruses, but for your own peace of mind, you should scan my generators once downloaded, just to be sure. Once you launch a generator, change some of the parameters just for grins, and then click on the green Generate button and specify the name of a file. The extent must be .scad. After you have downloaded OpenSCAD from openscad.org, launch OpenSCAD and open the SCAD file you just created. A quick and dirty image will appear. We'll cover how to zoom, pan, and rotate in OpenSCAD in a few minutes, but if you generally like what you see, hit the F6 key to do a fine rendering. This can take several seconds to a minute or so, and while rendering, the rough image will disappear, so be patient. When the tone sounds, click on the STL icon and save the object into a stereolithography file. Simple, right? Well, maybe not. I'm going to assume you were successful in downloading OpenSCAD and a generator program, got past any security issues, and are ready to go through the modeling steps again in a bit more detail. Let's give it another try. Let's start with the A-frame, specifically the shake shingle generator, which was the first generator program I developed. I wanted an A-frame structure, but was unwilling to glue paper or thin wooden shingles to a substrate. I just don't have the patience or the manual dexterity. But I do have a 3D printer. I observed that shake shingles are nothing more than rectangles of slightly differing sizes attached to a substrate in straight lines. They are of slightly differing thicknesses, but are shaved to a common pitch angle. I knew I wanted to specify the horizontal length of my roof, but instead of specifying the vertical height, I decided to specify the number of rows of roofing I wanted and their vertical offset, which would define the total height of the roofing panel. I collected all of these design requirements into a generator program. I added a green button to do the math to produce the .scad file for OpenSCAD. I also created a red button to exit the program and other buttons to reset the parameters to their default values. I like to think that the default values I chose were good starting points for most projects. And finally, two buttons to save and reload modified design parameters into configuration files as I iterated my design. There is also a notes window where the generator program can provide information to you. Let's run a sample with the default values and send the .scad file to a folder. I am going to launch OpenSCAD and do a file open to select the file the generator created. Almost immediately, a rough approximation of the model appears. You can press, hold, and move the left mouse button to rotate the model. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. You can press, hold, and move the right mouse button to pan. Finally, let's repeat these tasks, this time creating a basic building. Let's build a clapboard structure for a freight house, and let's make the ends in a peak of 30 degrees. We will save the parameters in a configuration file, in case we ever want to get back to this model and make modifications. And then click on the green button to create the SCAD file. We then launch OpenSCAD, and in package can be extremely useful. View. How to zoom the model view. How to pan the model view. How to add a hole to a model for a window or door. how to resize a hole or model shape, how to align holes or shapes, how to rename model files, and how to export a model for 3D printing. Tinkercad is a web-based application which you can start by visiting http://www.tinkercad.com from your web browser. When you do this for the first time, you will need to create a Tinkercad account. But since this is far from my first time using Tinkercad, I go directly to the main screen. To import our freight house, we click on the blue and white button to Create New Design. The design screen appears, and we click on the Import button in the upper right. The Import Shapes box appears, and we click on the Choose a File button and select the STL file that OpenSCAD has created for us. Tinkercad does allow us to alter the scaling of the model, but since we specified the dimensions to our liking in the generator, we just click on the Import button, and after a brief delay, the image appears on the screen. Now for some instructions on basic navigation. To rotate our viewpoint, we just hold down the right mouse button and move the mouse. To zoom in or out, we just rotate the mouse wheel. To pan up, down, left, or right, we press and hold the mouse wheel and then move the mouse. Pretty basic stuff. Next, let's add a hole in a wall for a door. A standard door is 80 inches tall, or 23.32 millimeters in HO scale, and I just happen to have a freight door that is 6 feet wide, or 17.50 millimeters, so let's add a hole to the front wall. To do so, we click on the gray cube shape and drag it to where we want it, and then release the mouse. The default size of a shape in Tinkercad is 20 millimeters on a side, so we need to alter the size of the hole. I want the hole to be about 2 millimeters smaller than the door, so I click on the black squares on the edge of the hole shape to make a dimension box appear. I then click on the box and enter a new value for the length, depth, or height of the hole. Arbitrarily, I'll make it 15.5 millimeters long, 5 millimeters deep, and 21 millimeters tall. I probably will need to reposition the hole after resizing it, which I do by dragging it into a position I like. Once done, I group the hole and the building to complete the task. To do so, I lasso both the building and the hole to select them both, and then click on the group icon to complete the operation. If at a later date you wish to move the hole, just select the building and click on the ungroup icon. Let's give this technique another try and add 2 holes for windows. Now let's add a rectangular hole and then resize the hole to 10 millimeters wide, 15 millimeters tall, and 5 millimeters deep. We can also use the black cone tool to raise the hole 6 millimeters above the work plane. To make a duplicate of the window, we use the standard Windows operations of copy and paste and drag the window holes to a desired position. Now, just for grins, I'm going to move one of the hole shapes and show you how to get them back in alignment. To align the window holes, I click on one and then shift-click on the other to select them both. With both holes selected, I click on the Align tool and select one or more of the align points. I group the window holes with the building and then have holes into which I can snap my windows. With my 3D printer, I often need to make my holes 0.75 millimeters wider and taller than the actual windows, but your mileage may vary. Tinkercad gives our model files funky names, and I like to rename mine by clicking on the name and entering a new value. Finally, To export our modified freight house, we click on the Export button, and Tinkercad places the modified model to our Downloads folder, from which we can direct it to our 3D printer following our manufacturer's directions. There are many other tools and tricks in Tinkercad, and if you want to learn more, take a look at YouTube for tutorials. I particularly like the 6-part series by Promo Ambitions. Now, back to the generators. While every building needs a roof, not all must be made of shake shingles, and we have a generator for roofs too. We just specify the dimensions and the type of roofing desired. Here we are generating one roof panel with semicircle shingles, and another using the option to bevel the top edge. There are two ways in which a pair of roofing panels can be joined. One way is to print a pair of unbeveled panels and sand the top edges to an appropriate angle and glue them. The other way, which I prefer, is to select the option to bevel the edges, making sure the roof angle matches that of the building where it will be used. In Tinkercad, I rotate one panel to its side, raising the edge back to the surface with the D key, and make a copy. I flip one of the panels, change my grid resolution to 1/10 of a millimeter, and abut them at their peaks by hand. I use the Align function to align their front and top edges and group them, after which I print them as a single object. I like to rotate the combined panels into a vertical position for printing, and usually use a brim to adhere the roof to the build plate of my 3D printer. At this time, shake shingles do not offer a beveled top edge option, but I expect that option to be available by the end of the summer of 2022. Am I on to something here with these generators? What about a brick wall generator? I can specify design parameters for the entire wall and the individual brick sizes. I can specify the size of the mortar runs and how far I want each brick row offset. I can specify if I want the edges to be flush or ragged. But there isn't much difference between a brick wall or a wall of construction blocks or a wall of field stones, just the dimensions. And I even provide some comments at the bottom to remind me how I might change them for HO scale. They look pretty nice. I just couldn't stop. A generator for frame windows was next, and the specifications for these were quite a bit more complicated. The first row of parameters specify the hole size for the window. Again, my printer tends to deposit a lip a bit where the filament first hits the build plate, so I usually make the holes in the wall 0.75 millimeters wider and taller than the windows which I will insert. Your mileage may vary. Windows have frames, and frames have widths, and there may be more than one window unit in the overall window. Individual windows have one or two sashes, and sometimes we might want to raise the lower sash. And sashes have mullions. Windows may have upper and lower pediments, and these have dimensions and styles. Of course, you can design windows as you see fit, but my website has several parameter files that closely approximate the designs from Tichy and San Juan, aka Grantline. The hits just keep on a-coming. My A-frame needed a poured concrete foundation, so I created a generator for that next, complete with cutouts for windows. And I bet you have an idea how I created the windows. And after the foundation, I just had to have a generator for a floor for my A-frame. A floorboard 1.8 millimeters wide is equivalent to a 6-inch wide board in HO scale, a bit wide but acceptable. Floors are really similar to decks and docks. Perhaps sometime in the future I may enhance this generator to create railings. Eventually, I plan to create documentation detailing how all the design options work. But until I do, I hope the field descriptions are sufficient. The generators are free to use, but I am not available to debug your designs, and the underlying code is copyrighted, so don't ask for it. Like all new computer programs, there may be bugs, and if you find one or have an idea for an enhancement, let me know. A link to my email is at the top of my website. But you are explicitly permitted to use these generators for structures on your model railroad. I also promised that this would not be a clinic on programming. But if you are a true computer nerd, here is 3 minutes of the basics. Otherwise, close your eyes, relax, and come back to life when I blow the whistle. I started by loading Visual Studio 2019 from https://visualstudio.microsoft.com/vs/older-downloads. And there are YouTube videos that show how this is done. You will need a Microsoft account to log into the download server, but accounts are free, as is Visual Studio. Newer versions of Visual Studio are available, and they work as well. Once downloaded, I start Visual Studio and click on Create a New Project, then on Windows Forms App.NET Framework, the Next button, and finally I give the project a name and click on the Create button. Anytime I want to return to an application, I just launch Visual Studio and select the project of interest from the initial splash screen. Now, it's just a matter of adding text boxes, labels, buttons, and code. The first thing I do with any new project is create an Exit button. I open the toolbox and drag in a button and give it some configuration properties, changing its color and text. I double-click on the button and add the End line of code, so that when the button is pressed, the program will end. To make the program run, I just click on the Start button. And if I get into an endless loop, I can always close the program from the taskbar and correct the problem. In Visual Basic, the message box statement can be a useful debugging aid. Adding a data entry box is similar. I drag in a text box and place it on the form. Note that a text box will have a name, something like text box 1, and you can refer to its contents by using textbox1.text as a variable. If you want to see if the box contains a number rather than text, use a function like isNumeric and the cdec function to convert a text value to a decimal number you can use in computations. Labels are even easier to add. Just drag in a label control from the toolbox and alter its text value as needed. I usually add another text box which I call Notes, and this area is to display general information. Here I am adding another command button which will display the time of day in the Notes area whenever the Clock button is depressed. If you want to read and write files, you will need to add the Open File dialog and Save File dialog boxes to your project. From time to time, I save the project by clicking on the File, Save All command. There is also a button that does this as well. The real joy comes in making the program do something useful. I create an additional button and insert all the code that does the real work behind the green Generate button. It ain't that hard, but it ain't that simple either. I have been writing computer programs since 1966 and have a master's degree in computer science, so coding comes easily for me. Perhaps you have a grandchild who can assist. That's all the help I'm going to give you. It's probably more than you really wanted anyway. I'm certain there will be more generators appearing from time to time. Shutters, louvers, trestles, stairs, and canopies will be added in the upcoming few months. Existing generators will be enhanced. For my part, I do hope you take away from this clinic access to new tools for producing 3D structural models. And if you have a programming background, particularly in Visual Studio and Visual Basic, I hope this clinic might inspire you to take the concept of front-end generators in another but similar direction. Generators for freight cars? Anyone? Remember, when it comes to designing 3D models, necessity may be the mother of invention, but frustration may be the father of the twins, imagination and innovation. Thanks for your attention.
So I would like to welcome everybody to the NMRAx Q&A session with Dave Ackman about 3D printing. So Dave, we have a couple of questions for you today. First of all, do you have anything that you would like to say to somebody who just started out 3D printing?
Well, there are two types of 3D printers, the filament type, which I have, which extrudes a filament through a heater and deposits the filament on the build plate, kind of like if you use a cookie press or a piping bag. Then there's the resin printers, which they are generally more expensive, especially if you get a UV dryer. But for the filament printers, you're going to have about 3 months where I say it's like falling in love. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be expensive. It's going to take turns that you never thought it would be. But if you stick with it, it can be really rewarding. If you're a filament printer type of guy or gal, learn how to level that bed. And if you got a problem, uh, try leveling the bed or change the nozzle. I've started doing more work with wood filament, wood impregnated filaments, and that's very abrasive, corrosive, or whatever. And I end up changing the nozzle on my printer about every 10 hours. But if I just use PLA, I can probably go 25, 30 before I've got to change the nozzle. Nozzles cost me about 40 cents and they're replaceable items. So don't think that you're just going to assemble your printer and it's going to work perfectly the first time. There's a real learning curve. What else do we have?
How long does it take you to create one of these generators?
Well, I'm a computer scientist by training. I've been retired for the last 14 years, so I haven't been that active. But uh, it took me about oh, 2 days to get back in the swing of using Visual Studio and I use Visual Basic. I also program in C, but I like VB better. To write one of these generators, uh, the first one took me about a week to get to the point where it was functional. But after that, I cloned it. So when I created generator number two, I didn't have to do all the buttons again, that type of thing. So I can probably knock one of these puppies out now in about 3 days. I want to do the one on peering and the one on louvers pretty soon, and I think I'm going to be able uh, to do it in about 24 hours of heads down programming. We've got our grandkids, two of them, staying with us this summer, and when you have a 7-year old and a 10-year old helping you program, it does take a bit longer. Anything else in the chat? Uh, you're, you're, You're on mute, Jacob.
There's a couple of other things. Specifically, besides like the general type, what like brand and stuff of 3D printer do you use?
I use an Ender 3 Pro from Creality. Uh, One of the things I learned, the most important thing when you buy a 3D printer, get a 30-day return because there's a lot of real crud on the market. When I started looking on what I should buy, I actually bought a smaller one that said that it had an automatic bed leveling, and it was only 4 by 4 by 4 inches. And the first one was dead on arrival. The second one died after 2 days. And if it hadn't been for the 30-day guarantee from Amazon, I'd have lost 250 bucks on a 3D printer that didn't do the job. I'm very happy with this Creality Ender 3 Pro. I think the one that's being sold right now is the Ender 3V2 for a filament printer. Entry level, 260 bucks. Now you're going to spend another 200 bucks probably on various filament colors pretty soon. Uh, and I do print in different colors. Sometimes I just print it in white and I paint it. But I'm doing some things now with handrails on stairs, and I make a little hole, and then I draw the handrail and I try to insert it. Well, the tolerances on these things between holes and handrail posts is not perfect, so you kind of fool around with it after a while to get the tolerances the right way. So bottom line, you're going to spend 500 bucks sooner or later when you get into 3D printing. Uh, but it's been a lot of fun.
That sounds great. And we have another question from the chat. Besides what you talked about in your video, can you think of any other uses of 3D printing in model railroading?
Well, the next one I think is going to be cars. Uh, I'm the AP, the Achievement Program Chair for the Gateway Division in St. Louis, and our group had been rather stagnant for a while, but we're starting to go again. And of course, structures is one of the areas that we founded a working group on structures just this month in July, and we're going to go for quite a while, doing about 9 months, just building structures until we get enough that qualify for the structures certificate. I think cars are going to be coming next. There's uh, Father Tim Odenhoven up in Milwaukee, and if you've ever heard him do a clinic, he does uh, some vehicles. He's done a ferry that is just fantastic. He's done freight cars. So I think that maybe the next place where I go is going to be in cars. But I've made the four structures that you've seen: the log cabin, the uh, freight house, the dock, and the A-frame. Excuse me, A-frame. So I've got a few more structures to go before I've got that going. But where you should look next? Well, just look at the achievement program, the type of things that you can build. Can I build uh, a locomotive or something like that? I think I can, but that's going to take me a lot more time.
And we have a couple more hot off the press. What could you use this system to create tunnel portals?
I'm sure it could be done, but I'll tell you why I'm not going to do it. Uh, I don't have a lot of tunnel portals on my layout. I have no tunnels on my layout. I can buy portals uh, easier than I can create them. And that's why I'm not doing doors as well. Uh, I can draw a door pretty easily, and it's not the type of thing that I can leverage like the basic building. I'll never design another four-wall building again. I'll use this technique. Same way with the roofing. Uh, but tunnel portals, I just don't think justifies creating a generator when I could draw it. I'm a Tinkercad guy. I could draw it in Tinkercad pretty easily. But if you're Fusion or SketchUp, of course, you can probably do that more easily than it would take me to do a generator.
And there is another question that says, what types of 3D printer specs are needed to have a good scale output?
Okay, could you repeat that again? It kind of broke up at my end.
What specs for a 3D printer are needed for a good result in HO scale?
Okay, I would get one where the build plate is at least 8 by 8, 200 millimeters by 200 millimeters. I was very glad that that first 3D printer, which was only 4 by 4, didn't work because I quickly would have run out of space for it. Uh, my 8 by 8 by 10 is what I have right now, and um, that works pretty well, but I'm beginning to covet something that's a bit larger, especially if you're going to get into cars. Um, I'm that freight house that you saw was right at the edge of what I can do on that printer as far as size is concerned. Now you can print on diagonals and that type of stuff, but that's kind of painful. But again, the most important thing is be able to return it. Uh, if you don't like it with 30 days, make your decision. Do you want to go filament or do you want to go resin? uh, will let you do finer detail, but you're going to spend more, not just for the 3D printer, but those resin printers have to the work has to be cured with UV light. Now you can take it out in the sun and let it cure. You can buy a curing chamber for about another $300 and not have to leave your basement or garage. Uh, but make your decision what type of filament or what type of printer you're going to go. I'm still happy with filament, and make sure you get the guarantee. But in addition to the guarantee, the most important thing is to know that you're going to learn as you go. It's not plug and play. But if you're willing to spend the time and get over that learning curve, which is about 3 to 6 months, um, it's going to be good for you. You're going to need to learn how to clean them out too. These things are, uh, it's not a microwave oven. It's something you're going to have to learn how to work with. So be willing to invest in it, uh, and you'll have a lot of fun.
Are there any specific parts in HO scale that you would not recommend trying to 3D print?
Well, I'm doing some right now, and it has to do with the very small parts. Uh, I wouldn't. I'd probably do that on a filament printer. That fishing dock that you saw. Right now, I am working on some bumpers. If you drive a boat into your own dock, there are bumpers, tires, or things around the side, so you don't crash your boat into the dock. So I'm trying to do some bumpers. Well, bumpers are only about, oh, 2, 3 feet in height. So that means in HO scale, 3.5 millimeters equals 1 foot. So they're going to be about 7 millimeters tall and about 3, 4 millimeters across those bumpers. That's really small. And that's giving me a little bit of headache right now. I hopefully can get those bumpers, long cylinders in there. But if I can't, I'm going to have to go to tires on the side because they're harder to print in HO scale. Also on my printer, where the part meets the build plate, it mushes out a little bit, about 3/4 of a millimeter in diameter, and that when you're really working on tolerances like the handrails, that can that can be a difficult thing to do in HO scale. I've got some folks that want me to do some work for them in N scale, 160 to 1, which is about half the size of HO. And I'm having problems. My roofing, which looks great in HO, doesn't look as good in N scale. Now, I don't know if that's because I haven't got it, really calibrated in my mind yet. How much distance do I need in height, and that type of randomization. So there's more things that I have to learn about N scale, but HO or higher, especially things at the structure or car size, you can probably make it work. uh, just I want to do a fruit stand, and I want to be able to print, you know potato things. That's going to be a challenge. There's uh, a young lady in Sweden, I believe, Eneli, who does some good work in that area, and I've corresponded with her a little bit, but I've got some things to learn about doing very small parts. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so what do we got here?
Um, I think that's all of the questions
Actually, Dave,
done with.
I've got one really interesting question, slightly off topic of your clinic. But
Yes.
how do you see 3D printing fitting into the AP program? Like, do you think it comes under the category of scratch building, or is it not going to meet criteria?
Well, as an AP chair, and as someone who's been in a couple of contests, I think my generators probably would be frowned upon in a contest environment. I think they're going to be great for building structures for your own layout, but I think if you used a generator to create something for a contest, I think you better disclose it, because I don't think it really qualifies for scratch building, because I've done most of the work for you. You've just filled out the form. Now, uh, I guess it's up to the integrity of each one who submits a model whether they disclose that. But I think as more people start to do this type of work, it's going to uh, be frowned upon by the contest committee as far as scratch building is concerned. Now, other contests, you don't have to do scratch building. I mean, it's only 15 points out of 125, but I think it's going to be an interesting topic for discussion, and I would go to the side of it's not scratch building if you use one of these generators.
Interesting. That's all my questions. Over to you, Jacob.
Um, do you think that you could print HO scale figures on a 3D printer?
I've done it. Uh, you saw the figure that I did for my grandson here. Now this is about 4 inches tall, but an HO figure is not that tall. It's probably about 18 millimeters. And I've done some design with Make Human, and at that size, a filament printer, it doesn't have the resolution. Would a resin printer? It might. Uh, but yes, I've done some figures, and it can be done, but it's right on the edge of my filament printer. Uh, well, we're getting close to the end now, and I want to do one more plug if I can. In several parts in the clinic, I mentioned my website, DAACK.github.io. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me uh, about this topic or any other clinics that I've taught, hey, I'm here in the States and I'm retired, and I got lots of things to do, but I'll try to help you out as we go along. So, and this clinic itself, if you missed part of it at the very beginning, it's on my website as well, and it'll be on NMRAx website too. So, or see me in St. Louis, because I'm going to be duplicating this clinic and another one on 3D printing there as well. So that's what I've got to share with you today. And I thank you all for the opportunity, and I think anything else, Jacob, or are we clear?
I think we're clear. Thank you, Dave. That was an amazing presentation.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
How's it going, everybody? Our next presenter has been interested in realistic operations since he was a teenager and has spent the last several decades attempting to improve the overall experience of operating crews on his HON3, EWET, and NC Nevada Division Railroad. He has done this by providing more prototypical operating procedures while also replacing plywood and hard shell with realistic sceneries and structures. Recently, his son Stefan has broached the idea of expanding the sense of realism to the dispatcher's office, which has regulated to a room separate from the visual action. The result is a 12-inch to foot model of an office that includes everything a 1925 short line dispatcher needs, including a window to the action. The new office has presented a few unintended and surprise wrinkles, including the now infamous McKinsey maneuver. Now, to discuss his new dispatching office and how it fits into the overall operation experience of his railroad, please welcome one of our newest MMR recipients, Dean Smith. And also, we have Speed from Africa today as well.
Ooh. Well, thank you very much. I'm from Vida, Missouri. Today we're going to talk about the operation of my railroad. This clinic's going to be a little bit construction on how I built the dispatcher's office. It's also going to tie it in a little bit to the operation, the whole milieu of mystique, if you will, of what I've tried to come up with the Vida division. Some of you may have seen my clinic back in October, also in NMRAx. I want to again thank everybody for inviting me back. So we're going to tie the two together. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, about me, I've been interested in railroad operations for a very, very long time. My first experience was actually flying model control planes with my father back in, in the early 60s. And I loved it because the planes actually did something. I then went into static modeling, but they were gathering dust. And so my friend Bill Albert invited me to help him with his model railroad. And we had a great time. One fateful day, I was not there, I don't think. Bill decided he was going to light some trains on fire and drive them around his layout, which destroyed his mother's laundry, and it put a premature end to his operation and his model railroading. But I was just getting started. So anyway, from the very beginning, I wanted to have a railroad where we were doing something meaningful. And the first big question I had, like a lot of people, was whether to do a freelance or a prototype railroad. My first railroad in my parents' basement was the Cedar Ridge and Tuckahoe Railroad, which was just completely HO standard gauge freelance. There's a little bit of that left on the Vida division. You can see a couple of cars that still ply the rails at Johnson City. Another thing I got interested in at the time was I got very interested in fantasy, particularly the Lord of the Rings. And for a long time, I seriously considered modeling the Middle-earth Railway, the Misty Mountain Line. And, admittedly, that would be absolutely wonderful. You could be hauling old Toby tobacco from the Shire, beer debris, mining mithril and Moria. But I decided, because of my love of history, I was not going to go that route. But one thing that planning this and thinking about it did, it introduced me to the idea of narrow gauge railroading, because it just seemed to me like a steam narrow gauge railroad would make sense in the Shire. So looking for a prototype, I stumbled across this article in Model Railroader, it's a Railroad You Can Model by Jim Kelly. And after I read this article, I realized that I'd found my prototype. It's a 66 short mile railroad. It's the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad. I call it the Vida division because that's where I live. And we do have an interesting mix of prototype, but then I'm also not afraid to add, other non-prototype aspects. One, because I think it's cool, and two, because I can use it to enhance the operation that I do. So if you look at my Givens and Druthers back from John Armstrong, what I wanted on the railroad, the ET absolutely met to a T. Prototype operation. I wanted freight and passenger car operation. Wanted a point-to-point train setup. Wanted to use prototype paperwork, but keeping that to a minimum. Dispatcher control, and that will tie in real importantly to what we're going to talk about in just a little bit. And of course, an added bonus with the ET was we have dual gauge operation in Johnson City. And the railroad is beloved by the mountain people. Call it the, they asked a little mountain woman one time, asked, how come the railroad was so loved by the mountain people that she served? And she paused for a minute and she said, well, I guess because it's the onlyest railroad around. And living in South Central Missouri, a good hour or more distance from any other model railroader that I know of, for a long time, I kind of felt like the Vida division was the onlyest railroad around. So we started operation back in 2002, but most of my crew, even to this day, are not model railroaders. And this is a plug for getting active and joining the NMRA, is since I've really started to get more active, I now have got a quickly growing group of friends and people obviously who sharing the same interest. And so I've been being invited to go operate on many other railroads, and we're starting to get a growing bunch of railroaders that are making the journey to Vida, Missouri, to take their hand in a throttle on the Vida division. So hopefully I'll be able to live up to their expectations. There's a map of the railroad. It's in a 23 by 28 foot room. We run it point to point. You can see where hit several of the major towns on the railroad. The dispatcher's office is in the room adjacent to the railroad, so it leads for, very realistically, until recently, the dispatcher couldn't really keep an eye on what was going on. So it's one thing we tried to fix. And my goal has always been to have the railroad take on a life of its own. And for a long time, the focus was on making operation as prototypic as possible. So as I developed a rule book, which is actually designed from one by the late great Paul Scholes. And this is available to all operators, and it just spells out the railroad, the rules. There's a map, typical. We also use a prototypic train order. The one in the middle is one from the Vida division, and it's just a half size reproduction of the two on the outsides, which are from the prototype. We also have used a prototype copy of the train conductor's train book, which is still, I just love this. We just found years ago, we found a copy of an actual freight conductor's train book, and it was half used and half empty. So we were able to research it, the Historical Society, and figure out, just how it was used, and then also just photocopied the page. So when a freight train runs on the Vida division, the exact identical paperwork is done to record the history of that run as the real railroad used. And then the middle is a timetable for the passenger trains, which again is very similar in the time. We run trains from Johnson City to Boone and return, and Boone, Johnson City and return. And they take a little over no time to run, which was it actually varies. I'm sorry, more like 2.5 scale hours to make the run, which was very close to what the real railroad used. So again, trying to keep the paperwork the same. We've used car cards for years. We're now experimenting with a JMRI manifest. Not really sure exactly what direction we're going to go with that. But either way, the idea is to be as prototypic as possible to reflect the movement of the freight trains. I like the prototype the freight trains were run as extras. The passenger trains were run according to a schedule. And of course, that's up to the dispatcher to make sure everything runs as smoothly as possible. And then, of course, we have a dispatcher's timesheet that enables the dispatcher to keep track of train movements. And that's done. He keeps in contact with the crews, as we'll see, through a phone system while he is remote. But that's it's pretty typical. There's a schematic on the left, and then the flow of time goes on the right. And so that's how he does it. And again, my idea of world building and fantasy to aid in the overall world building. Over the years, we developed, particularly with my help from my daughter, Becky, we now have excursion flyers. We have a postcard. You can see the upper postcard is the prototype. The lower one is my version of the VITA divisions with a photograph from my party point. And then also the back is there. And if you come to visit the railroad and have an operating session with us, you can actually get a one postmarked with the with an exact replica of the postmark that they used on Combine 15 RPO during the 1920s. We have 2 local newspapers. My daughter's also a journalist, and she's helped me with that. And we use the Johnson City Chronicle and the Watauga Democrat to keep friends and operators up to date with what's going on. And with the 100th anniversary coming up in 2025, since I model 1925, Becky is helping me come up with a commemorative coloring book for fans of all ages. So again, just kind of some silly fun things that bring the VITA division into the real world. We also, those of you who saw my last clinic, we found an old railfan scrapbook that we found, but for the purposes of this clinic, there's 2 pages that are very important. One was when they got to the gentleman, the anonymous, we don't know who it was, who found the scrapbook, got to meet Clarence Hobbs at the yard office. So there's photographs of the yard office. And then also he was fortunate enough to get a visit of the inside the dispatcher's office. So that's first clue of what we're going to be looking at in just a little bit. So like I mentioned, I just love operation. And so operations began just as soon as hard shell was complete. I almost had one of my precision scale RGS 20s that I was converting into an ET 10-wheeler. Almost came off the track and bounced off the floor because I was around in an area without hard shell. So before we started operating, we made sure that we had that taken care of. But this was over 20 years ago that we actually started operating, and it was great fun, learned a lot. Continued, obviously, as I made progress on the railroad. And again, there's some of the crews. The lower left was a NMRA regional convention in Jefferson City, Missouri in 2015. And that's the group that came and ran trains there. But it was always fun, slow progress being made. One of the things that I really added the most that I concentrated on was things specifically aimed at operations. So we developed a phone system, which we'll talk about in much greater detail, fast clock, got into DCC. Since my aisles are a little crowded, one of the big changes that we made was when we went wireless, because it was pretty crowded in some areas. And I was kind of joked. I said, "You think Miley Cyrus can twerk? You should see what my operators were doing when they were trying to wiggle around so they could plug their throttle in." So going wireless has helped a lot. So, and I also, though, continued making progress on scenery and structures, feeling, though, that they were almost separate entities. That, one, I was working on things for operation. 2, I was also, because I'm a modeler, working on the scenery and structures as well. And then, again, maybe had I been more active with other model railroaders at the time, or had been to operated other railroads, this wouldn't have been such a surprise to me. But it was just a wonderful revelation as things continued. Really felt that, the scenery and the structures and the realism and all that really was not an issue when it came to the absolute operating session, but we found out that it's not like chess. And I used to tell people for years, I told people, I said, operation is like chess. Is we're moving cars, we're moving, we're following a timetable, we're running cars, and we've got, nothing but either. First, it was 3x5 file cards with structures written on them with the names. Then I went to photographs on foam cards, and I said, but it's the same, because in chess, it is the same. It really doesn't matter what the board is. A quick look at Amazon, I found all the way from an $8.89 chess set to a multi-$1,000 chess set. And the game is exactly the same. It doesn't, I don't know how many of y'all play chess, but it really doesn't matter what you're doing it on. The one homemade, magnetic, virtual, the one in the left was one that I built from I think it was an article in Boys Life magazine in when I was a teenager using hardware. And then another that there is, on my phone, and then down below is a little travel thing. And I found this. I'm not going to buy it. It's pretty cool though. You can even play train chess. You can pit the steam against the diesels, and but it doesn't really matter because the game again is exactly the same. This was not the same with that we found with operation. And those of you, and some of you guys are probably going, well, of course, Dean. But trust me, I was absolutely shocked and just thrilled, and as were my crew. It's like, wow, these it's just a totally different experience. So there you can see it. And now here's where we're getting into now, because as the operating crews world continue to improve, I started wondering, what about the dispatcher's experience? As you can see there in the middle picture, that was a photograph from the very first operating session we ever had. And the dispatcher just sat on that table in the middle of the railroad, and people just called out when they needed to answer, which was fine. It worked. And then this was a little more clear view of what we had there without the glare on it that I set back up. And then to the right, you can see my original dispatcher's office, and kind of felt a little bit isolated from the action, which he was, because his contact was only through the phone and through the with the timesheet. It's really been very very enthusiastic about actually having a view into the railroad. So now let's kind of segue into the actual construction of how I went about building my dispatcher's office. So first thing, of course, I did was I went and I found inspiration from the prototype. There's no actual photographs of the dispatcher's office on the ET. So basically, I was just looking for something that would reflect a typical office from the 1920s. The real railroad used telegraph. While I'm I'm rusty as heck, but my dad back in the day, when I mentioned we were flying planes, that was before Citizens Band, so he had to have a shortwave license. He was proficient in telegraph in Morse code. And what's the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog? I'll never forget that sentence. Obviously, it has all 26 letters in it. But I did know that if I made a decision that you had to be proficient in Morse code to run the Vita division, even I wouldn't be running it. So we did make that obvious change and decided to use a phone system. But if you look at those two pictures, one of the things that really jumps out at you a little bit is the fact that they had a window. So there's my starting point. Again, don't judge my wallpaper. I was pretty lucky what I got started with. I already had this vintage desk that I got from my grandma with the chair. And so it fit in what I was trying to do. And you can tell from this photograph that I also share the room with some of my wife's hobbies, but that's okay too. We made room. But you can see that's where I was when I decided it was time to make the change. See, there already was the clock there, and we did have a switchboard set up, although it it was modern looking, and it was just to serve a purpose. So the first thing we did was made sure everything fit. So that's where we're at there. The phone is a reproduction phone that my daughter found for me at Goodwill. It's a flat screen TV that so just breaking it to you. It's not a real window that we decided to use, and then we'll go into a little more detail. But the switchboard on the right is what I came up with to try to more reflect a feel of a 20s office. So I did my scale drawing, make sure everything would fit, made the wings so they're detachable because so I can move it. My original plan was I also use that desk as my work table. And my original thought was to take it down every time that I wanted to work, but that, doesn't happen, guys. I just work around it. But just want to make sure everything fit. And you can see the difference in the perspectives because the upper drawing I had like it was laid out flat, and then the lower drawing gives the perspective of the fact that they're out at a 45-degree angle. And of course, you don't want to build anything until you test it. So my son helped me design the camera. So these were just early tests to make sure that everything was going to work. You see on the left there, it was just we're seeing what view we were going to get from the camera. And then the other picture, my wife likes Happy Meals sometimes, and she was kind enough to share her Happy Meal toy with me. So we have a Tyrannosaurus Rex that roams the railroad. I like to put it in different places before an operating session just to mess with my friend Brad Sloan a little bit. But there we have right out of Jurassic Park, Johnson City version. We've got that poor man is about ready to probably become lunch. But it all worked, and so we were ready to go. And then began the frame. Again, it's very simple. It's a 1x3 and with using plywood and recessed T-nuts. So the wings, again, would be removable, very basic. There you can see the drawings I made for the removable wings just to make sure that all would work. And you see there with the T-nuts and the brace. So, and just pretty easy carpentry. Plenty of clamps and space. Build it in just one nice sunny day. It wasn't 104 degrees like it is here today, but it was just a beautiful November day, I think. And there I am just gluing and screwing the thing together. And you can see here's what the frame looked like when it was complete. I made sure the top and bottom boards were exactly the same, and then extended out with the side pieces. You see there where everything is going to fit. Make sure it all fit. You see along the back, I was going to C-clamp it with that long board in the back. I do not need to do that. You also can notice I put little feet you see that on the right, so that if I do take them apart, they're freestanding, so I don't have to lay them down. Again, I haven't done that, but it's nice to be able to if I need to. Safety first, safety always. I'm not really much of a woodworker when it comes to 12-inch to the foot stuff. So I don't have a whole lot of wood tools. My entire railroad was built with a circular saw, a jigsaw, that kind of stuff. But I really, for the accuracy that this project required, I decided I needed something a little more accurate because we were doing a lot of, very specific angles. So a buddy of mine had an old radial arm saw that he was willing to let me have. So, and there we are doing it. There's reputation for not being real safe, and I don't imagine how that possibly happened. But that picture on the left is from Stumpy Nubs. That is from an actual instruction manual from the 1950s on what you can do with a radial arm saw. And you see that gentleman there, I probably even has a tie on, most of them did, but he's cutting that board and you can see where it's cutting him. That blade is going to go about 2 inches from his stomach. We were a little more careful than that. However, I noticed when I was putting this together, because we actually just went in, we almost always remember to wear those. So again, a radial arm saw, in my opinion, if you don't have a lot of tools, it's a wonderful tool, but it's definitely has its worries. Got some wainscoting and trim from Lowe's. Again, didn't really know what the inside looked like, so we went with something that was just, that would work, that would look like it was an actual dispatcher's office. And we attached it with brads and glue and clamps. So there again, it very, it was required accuracy, but you can see it's just basic, typical carpentry. Painted and ready to assemble. I use, for years we had a huge, and we still have, discussions in the ET historical societies. I'm sure all historical societies have, on what color was this, what color was that, what color was the depot, what color were the engines. Well, I finally decided on using, it was a Rust-Oleum moss green paint, which I consider my Tweetsy green, my ET green, because the railroad painted just about everything that didn't move green. So I took that and took a swath of it and had it matched at Lowe's. So the paint it matches the structures and everything on the rest of the railroad. The trim paint, which we'll get to, actually was just left over from a project my son and daughter-in-law were doing, which I thought was kind of prototypic, because it was, using whatever paint was available, which I'm sure railroads did a lot. So now we're going to look at the left wing. That's where the time clock goes. I use fast clocks from GML Enterprises. We use a 6-to-1. You see there's the controller that's on the fascia board. I'd wanted to use a larger clock with a pendulum, but I just couldn't get it to fit. So we just used the same clock we used before. Those clips are for, information, however the dispatcher sees fit. Usually train orders go on the left. And then just another plug, my good friend Tim Blackwell gave me that Cowcatcher magazine calendar, which I have proudly hung there. And just a plug, Tim's a great guy, and the Cowcatcher magazine it's top notch. It's really top shelf if you're interested in getting another magazine. But also, we hang protocol sheets there. Anything can go on that clip. And there's a picture of the dispatcher's switchboard. You can see again that there's a mass of wiring in it, but it really is not all that complicated. And the way it works, as you can see there, we've got phones at every station, and then there's also an out-of-station phone, which is in the gorge. And that phone is if a crew needs to contact the dispatcher anywhere other than in a town, he goes to that phone, but you have to wait 15 scale minutes, because that's how long it takes to get the kit out of the cab, shinny up the telegraph pole, and cut in. But yeah, this is the way it works. Real simply is if I'll get to that in just a minute when I'm showing everything. So there's the circuitry. Anybody who may actually be interested in building this, and this is a wonderful, wonderful phone system. Bob was kind enough to write up the circuitry, and this is available two ways. One, at the end, I'll have my contact information, and if you contact me, I will be glad to send you an electronic copy. Also, an article on my dispatching office was included in the 2021 HON3 annual magazine. And this circuitry, without the parts list, but this circuitry is printed in there as well. So it's available there. But again, it's a very simple circuit. It's very repetitive. It can be used for as many phones as you need. So worked out really well. And I was able to build it. So there's my drawing of the switchboard. Again, just to make sure everything would fit, I used white dry transfer lettering from Woodland Scenics to do all the lettering. I used rotary switches because I thought that would give a little better view, a better look for prototypicality. and then use kind of large clunky toggle switches for down below. The switches, the 3 switches on the left are deal with the switchboard, and then the ones across there, that's how you control. There's a staging yard for reversing trains and for staging pretty much the standard gauge. So those switches there control that track work. And there it is, drilled out in masonite and then just painted black. Very simple. And there's the phone system components. This is how everything works. I guess there on the left is the switchboard. On the right is what you'd see on the fascia. And if the way it works is if a crew wants to call the dispatcher, because that's what usually happens, it picks up the phone, and all he has to do is pick up the phone, and then the light above whatever area lights up, and then the dispatcher throws the rotary switch to A for answer, and then the conversation happens. If the dispatcher wants to call a crew, if he picks up his receiver and then turns the rotary switch to whichever area he wants to contact, then that light above the phone lights up to let the yard master or the crew at that area or whatever. Now, since not everybody spends all their time staring at a light, there's a switch there on the dispatcher's office that says call, and then there's a little button by each phone where if you just push that button briefly, a buzzer goes off. 2 different ones, one for each area, to just remind all the crews, if the dispatcher needs to get a hold of somebody, he hits his call button, there's a discreet little beep that happens, and everybody looks to see if their light is lit up. It's the best thing I could think that I could come up with to cover that, but works really, really well. And again, it's except for the fact it's not a telegraph, it's real similar to what the actual railroad would have done. And there it is, all plugged in, and again, so it can be moved. And then the other picture is a picture of the circuitry that goes under the layout. There's the diodes and all that, and that's just in a phone box. And there's one of those behind the fascia by every phone. And there it is in action. You see there one picture, that's at Hampton, where the phone is waiting to be used. And then that wonderful person there on the right is my daughter, Becky, who's an avid operator on the railroad. And she is running, I think, passenger car, train 1, westbound from Boone to Johnson City. And she's calling the dispatcher to probably get clearance to head on into town. Now the window, that was a lot of fun, and that's just it's a flat screen TV where I cut the frame. My original plan was to put trim around it and have the trim come out, but instead, if you see that slot on the right, you can reach behind, and by counting up with your finger, you can do any of the controls you need to have on the phone. So I just accessed it from the back. That mullion in the middle is just force fit, so I can take it out because I can use this as things other than a window if I want to. So again, very straightforward. There I am. I've taped the screen so when you paint on it, and then went over with the trim paint around the edge of the phone itself. And then it just slides in, being held in the front by the window trim, and then in the back, I just placed wood in and screwed it in so that there's nothing enters the TV itself. Somewhere in the basement, I've got the base, so if I ever want to return this to a real TV, I can. But it held it in real well, and I didn't have to worry about any kind of any damage to the electronics. And there's the completed window. Again, just took drawings of windows and, to cut the sill and all that and make the upper window. The handle I got from Lowe's. Originally, it came with Phillips screws, and I was cutting the head off of a screw, and I lost it. So I'm looking all over for it. And then I got to thinking, I had to do a little research. Well, I found out that Phillips screws were not invented until 1932. So with the rivet counters out there, I decided to use just a standard screw, but that's just, they're glued on. I was kind of neat. I had some friends over, and their son, I bet he's about 8, I guess, was looking at it, and very quickly, I didn't get a chance to stop him. He reached up and broke the handle off of the window because he was trying to raise the window. which again, fortunately, I just had to, glue it back on and touch up the paint, so it wasn't a big deal. But it made me feel pretty good that the window was realistic enough that somebody tried to open it. The camera, a camera is a miniature video camera mounted with foam on a craft stick, and then we use a Raspberry Pi computer. It's all connected by ribbon. We tried Wi-Fi at once, but then figured it's only about 10 feet maybe through the wall. So we decided it was just a lot easier to hook everything up with ribbon cable. So, and that just, hooks to the TV. And there's the instructions again. Now, this wasn't published in the article, but if anybody's interested in actually doing this the way I did it, again, contact me electronically, and my son worked up instructions on how to build this little fella. So it's all there. And there's operating the window. I don't have a real good memory sometimes, so it's helpful to me to have the instructions on how to turn it on, but we just use a wireless little cheap keyboard that I keep in the drawer, and there you can see in the middle of it getting booted up, but it's looking pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. Now the camera's in the window, so what I did was, if you match the view of the HO scale dispatcher, if you're the 12-inch to the foot dispatcher or the 5/8 of an inch HO scale dispatcher, you have exactly the same view of the Johnson City yard, which I just think that's kind of neat. I had to remove the mullions, as you can see, so they didn't cast a shadow. But interestingly enough, I found it looked a whole lot more realistic with the acetate still there. So I took the acetate out, and then I ended up putting it back in. But that's how it looks. The building just fits over the camera, and so yeah, you get exactly the same view. Needed a lamp, so I just browsed Amazon and found a light that's a modern light that looked good for the scene. So that's what we've got there. Dispatcher T, that's Stephen operating, and for years. Well, Stephen and I are both avid home brewers, and so one of the perks of operating on the Vita division is afterwards, my crew gets homemade beer and also homemade root beer. Stephen years ago, was saying, Dad, dispatching's kind of boring, and I'm not really around the models. So we obviously we have a rule that there's no alcohol to be drunk during an operating session. I think the real railroads have that rule too. I'm not sure exactly how well it's followed, but he said, Dad, I'm kind of by myself. So that night we invented the concept of dispatcher tea, which is that mug right there. And it's a strictly don't ask, don't tell. Whatever happens to be in that mug during an operating session is fine. And just to point out, the kegerator is right across the hall from the dispatcher's office. So. And then, where were you when the gay golden earring rocked Johnson City? For reasons I don't remember. Anytime I test a system, I always test it with golden earrings, radar love from Midnight Special. So I threw that in to let people know that you can that we can use that as a computer. You can search the web. My friend Dave Steenland, I was fortunate enough to operate on his railroad in Tulsa a year ago or so, and he's got a room off the side with a big screen, and he plays movies of trains and stuff outside the railroad room. But he also has a short video for newcomers about his railroad, and I haven't done this yet, but I'm really wanting to do that. The same thing with the Vita division for people, it's their first visit, and then we could play that, and so you could sit in the dispatcher's office and watch it through the window. And now in its other life, I'm a messy modeler. I admit it. I own it. It's my comfort zone. And there you can see my dispatcher's office, the way it looks before an operating session. And again, I just work around the wings. I got another drop light that's portable. I use of course, Tweetsy green towel to protect that wall, but it works just fine, and it keeps me from having to take it apart. After a work day, as I mentioned, Brakeman's Best Brewing Company. My son and I are both, since we do trains, we got it named after a railroad. There's some of our samples. That picture on the right is my kegerator. And then the HO scale of Brakeman's Best is on Railroad Street in Johnson City. And you can see there where, of course, I model 1925, which is dead in the middle of Prohibition. So you can see where they kind of half behind painted out brewing with some cheap paint, but it's fading, and so you can read it underneath there. And I'm 100% sure those two fine citizens of Johnson City are not drinking anything that the Uncle Sam would mind that they were drinking. But this is what we do at the end of the day. Now, perhaps the most prototypic thing that ever happened on my railroad. I want to introduce you, if you don't know him, to Tom Short Rail McKenzie. Tom's a good friend of mine out of St. Louis. He loves operating the railroad, and he loves to operate. He's a yard master at Johnson City. So the first operating session that we had, very first thing he did with the window, so he went in, he scoped out the window, checked it out, complimenting how cool it was. And then he went in, and the very next thing he did, if you can see, was he spotted 2 boxcars directly where they would block the view of the dispatcher. And he left those cars there throughout the entire operating session because he figured that he was keeping the dispatcher from watching his nefarious deeds. But anyway, that you're looking there on the right, that was the dispatcher's view for the entire operating session, because Tom moved him when he had to, put him back when he didn't. So anyway, that may be the most prototypic part of the entire operation that we have, but it is now infamously known as the McKenzie maneuver. As I mentioned, there was an article published. I want to thank Chris Lane for doing this, but there was an article on my dispatcher's office that was published in the 2021 HON3 annual. And again, there's a play-by-play description on how it was built. Bob's schematic is in there. Again, Stevens is not. So again, if you're interested in actually building it, you can contact me electronically, which you do by right there, smith5@embarkmail.com. This train is bound for glory. The brakeman has resigned. Book by Kurt's boy Mark. Fascinating book. Love that quote. I want to thank everybody for attending my clinic. My contact information is there, and I believe I was asked to try to keep it around 45 minutes, and we're at 44 minutes and 28 seconds. So I'm guessing my time should be just about up. I want to thank everybody again for their attention. I had a great time putting the clinic together. And a quick plug, there'll be this clinic is also going to be at the National Narrow Gauge Convention in St. Louis. So hopefully people are planning on attending there, and I'll certainly be there. And oh yeah, and also if you're interested in the scrapbook, my clinic with the scrapbook will be there as well. So anyway, I'm done. So thank you very much, and I guess I'll stop sharing.
All right, Dean, we do have a couple questions for you. First one is, what prompted you to take a look at JMRI Manifest?
Going to it was a clinic in Hickory. John Short, I should know his name. Yeah, a clinic given on it, and he models narrow gauge railroading just like I do, and talked about all I use JMRI for is operation. But again, car cards have always worked for me. But again, when we're trying to get away from what Tony Custer calls non-railroad thoughts, which kind of. That's one of the reasons why I use the little profile phones. I didn't mention that, but one's because they were cheap and I could find them. But I didn't want that to distract from the experience of the operators. Oh, cool! Here's a vintage phone. I just want them to concentrate on picking up the phone and the information that they were passing on. But the same thing with car movements. So we, if the computer's doing it, then it takes the control of what cars are going to be picked up and takes it away basically from me and puts it into a more realistic look at that. These are what the little 5/8 inch tall customers need the ET to do for them that day. I'm still working out the glitches. I know we all are. I'm still having like I have a box car full of sauerkraut being taken to the coal shed in Cranberry. I don't know if they were having a picnic and needed sauerkraut or what. And I'm still having some issues with getting hopper cars. Those of you how do it, I had to divide because the prototype just used hopper cars as they needed them, but otherwise I was ending up with tailings being delivered to the iron furnace. So I designated different hoppers for coal, hoppers for iron, hoppers for tailings, and we're working on it. It's a work in progress. We had an operating session, first one since COVID, yay, about 2 weeks ago. And it was we did use a switch list. It was a little bit hybrid. I had JMRI printed out. I did make a few changes on it to kind of iron out the moves that just didn't seem to make sense. But yeah, that's why. Just again to do something a little more outside of or actually putting it into chance, putting it to outside this would be a cool move to make. So that's why.
All right. Where did you get your fast clock again?
Oh, JML, is that the company? I should know that. JML Enterprises, and I just absolutely love the analog clocks. I got those. It's been quite a while now. I think, and if I was modeling modern railroading, I would try to use an analog clock because nothing against digital fast clocks, but when you look at them, you can see that the minutes are moving too fast. Whereas with the analog, the way we look at an analog clock is you look at the clock, you register the time, and you look away. What I still have to do this, I have to take my watch up because I also use an analog wristwatch. I'm just kind of old fashioned that way. I have to take my watch off and put it in my pocket because I'll be looking at my watch to try to see what
Okay.
time it was. So
All right. Is your phone circuit diagram available somewhere?
is what?
Your phone circuitry diagram?
Which circuitry?
For your phone?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I'll say that again. It's available 2 places. It's available in the 2021 annual magazine, and also if it's still on the screen. If not, it's my email is smith5@embarkmail.com. That's spelled out SMITHFIVE at embark with a Q, EMBARQMAIL.com. And if you send me a request, I will send you an electronic copy of the circuitry for the phone, and if you'd like for the cameras as well. It's a very simple circuit. It uses just a handful of diodes. You need a handful of diodes for each phone. You do have to run a separate line for each phone. There's a separate 4-wire telephone. You can't hook the phones up in parallel. But so it required some running some wire. But it works absolutely wonderfully. My friend Bobby's a electrical engineer at University of Missouri at Rolla. What is it? Missouri S&T. Yeah, Missouri School of Science and Technology. Whoa, whatever. Here in Rolla. And he's also a model railroader, and he designed that circuit for me. And yeah, it works perfectly. And it for what I need, I can't recommend it high enough. So absolutely. I'd love to share the circuitry. And then if anybody has any questions about it, and if I can't answer them, I know Bob can. So
all right. How many words per minute were prototype operators required to be able to receive?
way more than I can. I honestly don't know. We have I've got an old telegraph form, that I show, but yeah, I have no idea. But I remember that because Daddy, oh shoot, we were flying planes back in the early 60s with the old rubber band powered solenoid servos, and it was just push button control, and it's some of my happiest memories as a kid. And Daddy, he had to have a license because they didn't have citizens band then, so he had to be proficient at Morse code. So he taught it to me. And one fateful day, oh man, I mean, he took out his newest plane, and his friend Bob Love wanted to go out with him, and Bob took it up to stalled out, and anyway, it just crashed. And Danny came home and with a box of junk. And bless his heart, I mean, he sat there on I remember I found, to me as a kid, it seemed like hours just staring at it. And that the next day, as God is my witness, he sold everything except for Bluebird, which is his favorite plane, which is hanging proudly in my basement. And I still have the controls with the push buttons. I still got all that 1960s technology. So I promised him when I got into model railroading, what I told him was, I said, Dad, I'm going to be really frustrated sometimes, and I'm going to have a lot of problems with locomotives, but I can promise you one thing, Dad. While I'm fighting with them, they're going to be sitting on a piece of track, not falling out of the sky.
All right. Dean, thank you again for giving your wonderful clinic.
Oh, well, thank you.
He'll be over in the breakout rooms. Unfortunately, though, it is time to head into our little break.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's right, because I ran late getting started. All right, well, thank you very much. I'll make sure I figure out how to get into that breakout room. So thank you very much, everybody.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good night. Our next presenter owns Nick's Train Z, home of the Decoder Buddy. He will share his experience of making custom covered hoppers from kits today. Well, please welcome Nick Santo.
Thanks, Lloyd. A few months ago, a fellow that I know came in and he wanted another 25 covered hoppers. Why the presentation is called AccuRail to the Rescue is because when somebody comes in the door and says, I want 25 or 36 actually wanted Trinity, but we settled on ACF hoppers. Where do you go to get kits that have no paint and are in pieces? That's the tough part. So I was lucky. AccuRail had kits. I talked with Bob Walker, and before very long, I had AccuRail kits here in the cellar. I decided that maybe the best thing to do, aside from making the kits, was try to show people how to do a plastic kit from the gray or tan plastic that came in the box. So if you'll roll the video, I'll show you the highlights of it and be around to ask questions. Hi, please roll the video. Nick. This is the freight car that I'm going to build 36 of. This is the set of plans ready to go. And the next picture here will show the cars that I'm going to replicate. The very first part of the project was to separate the cars into all their components and organize the project. What this is going to do is going to give me a little bit of time to perfect methods and show you how I did each step in terms of separating, preparing the sprues, painting the sprues, painting the shells, decaling the parts, and assembling the kit. What we have here is the basic sprue. I've nipped off the injection points for the styrene, and I'm trying to get a method to smooth the bottom of those steps off. This doesn't seem to be working quite as well as I'd like, so I'm going to think about it overnight and see if maybe tomorrow I can come back with a better idea. This is one way of smoothing a piece of plastic. This turned out to be a much better way. The file could be angled so that the bottom of the step was absolutely smooth and now ready to paint. One of the next steps was to paint the trucks, which had come out to 72 trucks for the project. In the past, I've done this before, so I had a jig to hold the trucks so that I could paint them. Essentially, what I wanted to do was keep the places where the bearings or the axles fit into the trucks clean so that they'd be freewheeling. And the trucks were nicely formed, not very nice trucks, but shiny plastic. So I thought I'd like to turn them to a duller black. And I had some Tamiya spray paint that would do the job very well. After I get this jig loaded, we'll take it over to the hood and spray some flat black paint on it. Here you can see the completely loaded jig. Shake the can a little bit and spray the black paint onto the wheels. The paint came out of the Tamiya spray can very quickly. The nice thing about the Tamiya was you could put the cap on, set it aside, and have it not plug the nozzle. These are the finished product. I think they came out pretty well. Oh, there's a piece of white something that I want to get off there. And right now is a good time to do it. Next step will be to decal these, and I'll show you that a little bit later. And they can be weathered for a finished product. The wheels were next. They're awful nice and shiny. Not quite the right rusted color that I'd expect to see on a rail car. What I did was I wanted to have a place to put the wheel sets. You can see me with the paintbrush and paint, just going around the outside so that I don't get any paint on the axle points. Making the process a little bit easier. Took a little bit of learning. After fumbling through the first couple of them and replacing them, I got this process to go a little bit quicker, a little bit easier anyway. After doing a few, it started to go a little bit quicker. Maybe not quite this quick, but certainly as I learned the procedure, it went faster. And that's a nice thing about doing a bunch of cars or a bunch of particular operations. You learn shortcuts or you get better at it. This step is going to include painting, having very clean equipment is important. Preparation time is well spent. Making sure all the parts are clean and ready to go is an important step. Getting the paint well mixed is very good. I happen to use True Color. I like it. I haven't had to wash any models with soap and water for either mold release or fingerprints at all. It goes on smoothly, thin, and doesn't take very much thinning, but I will use a little bit of thinner. Getting it the right consistency for the airbrush is an important step. And certainly mixing the paint is equally important. Checking its consistency. and then putting it in a condition where it'll stay until I'm ready to spray. Preparing the airbrush is important as well. One thing I'm not going to show you here is that I'm going to take some raw acetone, not thinner, just raw acetone, and shoot it through the airbrush to make sure that the airbrush is going to work correctly when I finally set it up. Here I'm at the fume hood, checking the flow on the airbrush. Maybe I'll make an adjustment, maybe I won't. Seems to be working well. A pair of hemostats to hold a sprue is very handy. And not cutting all the pieces off the sprue before you're ready to paint is an important step to consider. I'm going to show quite a few airbrush pictures or video segments just to give you an idea of what the procedure is all about. After you get the airbrush spraying the way you want it, watching what's happening, watching for the dry area and the wet area, and keeping that airbrush moving is very important. This is a solvent-based paint, so doing it in a fume hood is very important, and even with water-based paint. The pigments are not necessarily tested for the best of health. Having a rack to put the finished pieces on is very handy. We'll show you the same thing from another angle. Again, just to show you the airbrush movement. What I can't get you in close enough to see what's happening there, but you can see it's spraying. And just keep that airbrush moving so that you aren't putting an awful lot of paint on at one place. If you put a lot of paint on one place, it's going to run. You don't have to put it all on to the same place at once before you move on to the other side. I do a little bit on one side, a little bit on the other side, go back to that first side, make sure that it's all covered. Before I hang it up to finish. Some of the sides are more complex, so that you have to be careful of what your angle is on the airbrush versus the sprue or the parts that you're spraying. Try to stay away from the inside of coupler pockets, but I'm going to try to get the sides of the car ends there so that they're all painted well as well. That's a picture of just a coat hanger that I hung up there. It's still up there and holding sprues that are all painted and drying and waiting for the next step. Just checking the spray, and we'll go after this car shell or car body this time. Again, I'll show you a couple pictures of this. Essentially, what I want to do is just get a coat of paint on there, a light coat at first. That'll be on the whole car here eventually. Make sure to get a couple angles on the end so that the ladders are covered from both sides. Back up the other side. Taking a second to inspect the car is very important. It's much easier to get it now while it's on the holder and not trying to redo it later. One thing I do is use compressed air just to blow off the car before I paint it. Get the dust off, inspect it a little bit, make sure it's clean, not washed, not dried with this paint. No primer, it's just one shot. When I finish at the end of the day's painting, the glove will be gray in the fingers instead of blue all over. I like the nitrile gloves. They seem to hold up. One last sequence on the same car. Here you can see me cleaning it off again. Just a little bit different angle, give you an idea of what's happening. It's probably a lot more fun spraying cars than watching it getting done, but I wish I'd seen a video like this back when I was first spray painting or airbrushing. And any of you back in the back of the room who are going to sleep, it's okay to sleep. Just no snoring, please. Those walkways on the top are interesting. They're definitely sided just like the ends of the freight cars. And if you hit them on one side with the airbrush, they look fine. If you turn it around, it just doesn't come out the same. You have to be careful to spray both sides of those treads. Painting and inspecting toward the end is very important. Making sure that you have all the areas covered, and away you go. Now, after they're all painted, take an inspection to see if everything looks right. That one looks pretty good, so I guess maybe we'll go after it with the with sprue cutters. Sprue cutters are okay for the smaller parts. Eventually, I went on to use flush cutters on the big end pieces and any of the bigger parts that are on the sprues. The coupler boxes were of interest. While I've got the sprue in my hand, just to take the knife again, or I probably could have used a file on that, but since it's the back where it sits on the frame of the freight car, it wouldn't be seen, so just to go across it lightly with the X-Acto knife was a good idea, or the number 11 blade, and placing the air tank on these was a tougher job than what it looked like. We'll take one more look at the sprue after it's been painted. You can see now I've gone over to the flush cutters to cut the big parts off. It's just much more, at the very least, it's much more comfortable doing it this way. I won't cut all the pieces off, just the ones I'm going to use for now. Just clean that back area off so that it sets flush on the frame. Same on this one. Nothing special. Adding the air tank to this section of the shell proved to be more of a challenge than what it looked. It fits nicely, but getting it into the spot where you can fit it into the piece turned out to be a pain. It's sided in terms of the post that goes into the hole. It's just press fit. It's a nice fit once you make it work. But the trick is making it work. The roof hatches turned out to be a little bit of a challenge for me at first. They should cut off easily, straightforwardly with the sprue cutters. It wasn't an awful lot of material there to cut through. Turned out that cutting them off that way with the sprue cutters gave me a much smoother edge that I didn't have to go back and work. Cutting them the first way required that I had to clean them up just a little bit with a knife, or a file would have worked. Just to make them look good. We'll show you how those fit onto the top of the car later. That worked really well for the back of the coupler. You get them nice and smooth there. And that is the back side of the coupler pocket, so that if it isn't perfectly smooth, it won't be the end of the world. Those are small parts, and again, we'll just save them for later. You can see after I figured out how I really like to take those off and minimize the amount of time it took to clean them up, they go pretty quickly. So 2 down, 34 to go. Same procedure worked good for the gates. And the steps. And the car bottom. The next thing I'd use is, you could use CA here. I like to use Model Master, toluene or ethyl acetate based styrene melting glue. You can see those holes are a big square and a small square, so they are sided. You have to get the bottom part of the bottom hatch in the right end of the car bottom. They go together very easily. Then we'll put them all aside. You can see here on this end of the car is the brake end, or the B end. You have to be careful with this. It's easy to mix these up. They fit very nicely. They bottom, and then just a little bit of glue on either side. There's a little bit of glue to hold in that air tank. It's enough to melt in and hold it. It's not going anywhere now. On the A side, notice there's no brake wheel and no air cylinder or air tank. Again, it fits very nicely down into the slot. Pressure fit, and just a couple drops of glue to hold it in there. Works very well. Not a lot, just a trace. It'll melt it a little bit, and it'll harden and block it also. I'm just cleaning up the bottom of the weight. The nuts have been placed on the weight with epoxy, and here I'm using a little bit of automotive two-sided tape. I'm not sure whether I'd use this method again or not. It holds well. It's a little bit messy to hold on the weight on the inside of the car. Where the weight goes on the inside of the car is got detents in it, so it fits well. Here I'm showing you the flat side and the rounded side of the places where the roof hatches go. I'll use just a little bit of that same glue to melt and put those hatches in. Here you have a picture of the decals, kind of pre-cut up from their large sheet. We'll take a big decal first and just soak it in water, get it ready to move. There it moves. We'll get it to a place where I can move it easily with my fingers. I could have positioned that a lot better, but we'll wet it down and show you that that's not the end of the world. We can move it this way with some water. They are water slide decals. That's a pin and a pin vise. Might be a needle in a pin vise. Got plenty of time to work with that decal now with the water. You can move it significantly around. You can get it squared away. If you've got any ends tucked in, now's the time to take those away. And you see I brought in a little bit more water, and I'll bring in even a little bit more water just to move it into the general position where I want it. Next, what I'll do is I'll start blotting it out with a dry brush, taking that water out bit by bit, squeezing it out. And that also gets rid of a lot of the bubbles that'll silver on you on a decal. I still get some silver spots under decals. It's not the end of the world. Just take a pin to them, number 11 blade, a nice sharp one to pierce those silver spots and add a little bit of micro sol or Walther's Solvaset. What I've done now is I've brought in the microsol, and that makes the decals really slide around nicely. Can control it pretty well, kind of nudge the decals into the position where I want. I have a brush with shorter bristles that is more aggressive on moving a decal around. You can brush it to one side or another and get it set where you want. maybe put just a little bit more Solvaset. Or actually, this is Microsoft Celisolve. No. Solvaset. Nope, hold on. Stop. That was too good to edit out. Actually, what I was trying to say was either Microsol or Solvaset. In this set of pictures, what I've done is I've removed the decal from the paper and moved it with just the end of the brush. Moved it around a little bit with the brush. Now I'm using the Microsol to help me position. And the Microsol will work its way under the decal and actually set it up very nicely. These are the Smokebox Graphics reflective FRA stripes. I like a flat toothpick to burnish them onto the model. And to work them into position. In this picture, I'm going to grab a decal out of the just plain water on the end of a brush. And put it on a truck. Bill Berlinger makes great decals, and he asked me if I wanted numbers for this particular operation. I wasn't sure I wanted to do this, but it turns out to be not too bad. Blot away the water. And then just add some Microsol to that. That'll set it up. If they need to be moved around a little bit more, right now is the time to do it. When you're working with this small a decal, that Microsol is really going to soften those decals up a lot and very quickly. So you have to be very quick with that one. Now we're on to a different operation. What I want to do here is just take some paint on a makeup sponge and blot it onto a KD coupler so it doesn't affect the coupler operation, but it certainly affects the looks of the coupler. Brake wheels were kind of an interesting proposition on this. This is a water-based paint. And again, that's pretty small to be rubbing an awful lot of toothbrushes or whatever on. So I decided not to wash it again, but just to kind of wetten it up with some water and acrylic paint. And that's Walmart's best acrylic paint for black. Best meaning the cheapest one I could find. And then just work it around like soap and water. And it really worked very well. The brake wheels came out superbly. The next step on the bottom of the car was to add the gates. And the direction doesn't make any difference on those gates. And in terms of the holes that are there to put them on, it's important to realize that the mechanisms go toward the center of the car and not toward the trucks. The second tough piece that, for me, that went into the car was the steps. And I saw it coming a little bit, so I took my file and started working back the structural part. Tried to force it in without breaking the step itself. And it wouldn't force in very nicely, so I had to think about this for a minute. The fume hood was on, so you don't see the blue smoke now. And now you know why the audio portion was dubbed over. Might be beer 30. One more try here. Nope, beer 45. Let's have another thought at this tomorrow. Gotta be a better way. Guess this is tomorrow. Didn't take very much to open that hole up. And yeah, I did file those steps off. Look at that go in now. What I don't show on the video here is just a little bit of cyanoacrylate on the end of a pin, and a pin vise is the way I really like to do fine CA additions. And what I did was I just caught the back of that step with a little bit of CA, and it catches onto the end step there. I put just a dab of CA in there to hold both of those so that I don't lose those steps on the layout sometime. For me, sometimes a good night's sleep and to think about it or process it with my eyes closed is a good idea. I didn't have to turn the hood on and could let the lady back in the house again. This is what they all looked like at the end. There was more, a little bit more to it than this, but those are the major parts of the show, or of the job. These are the 25 that were requested of me. I guess the prototype look is me stumbling through rocks trying to catch pictures of all these on the railroad. Sorry, the video could have been a little bit smoother, but that's just the way it was. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm available for questions through my website at Nick's Trains if you want. Have a good day. Thanks for watching.
Okay. That was a great video, Nick. I've got some questions for you. Let's start with one here. How many hours did it take to do all that?
Well, I'm not quite finished yet. I delivered 25 and I've got all the rest painted. Right now I've got decaling to do, so I've got 125 hours into it so far, and I've probably got another 5 hours of decaling and then putting the final coat of protective semi-gloss paint on them. So it'll take a while longer, but it's good work. It's tedious. You know, that if you take 36 cars times four axles per car, you come up with quite a few quite a few trucks to put together and axles to paint.
So basically, can I send you my order of 25?
You can, but don't hold your breath.
Okay. What was your rationale for painting before assembling?
I'm not sure I had a rationale for that. I've just started airbrushing recently. I think I get a good finish. I use true color paint, and it sticks well. If I need to make a joint between a part or two parts, I can scrape it off. I also find that when I'm shooting with an air gun or an airbrush, I want to get behind a part. I want to get a good finish. So when the parts are on sprues, I can do all the painting of, say, the tops of the colors that covers that go on the cover doppers, or I can get all four sides of the triple valve, um, particularly when it's on the sprue, and then to cut it off after it's dried later. If I need to scrape off some of the paint to make a good fit into the car, a part into the car, then that works for me. It's just procedure and technique. It's my technique of getting the whole car done.
Yeah, I do the same thing, but do you have problems when you're gluing two pieces that have been painted together? Because when you're gluing plastic to plastic, it's like melting the plastic. But if it's already painted, do you have a problem doing so?
I would think that with an acrylic paint that would be true. With a organic based paint like the True Color paints, I haven't found that to be a problem. And at the very last step, after all the parts are on and the decals are on, I go over it all with a lacquer, a semi-gloss lacquer, dull coat, a little bit of dull coat and a little bit of crystal coat, and paint the whole thing so that I haven't really had any trouble with parts falling off.
Okay. Before painting, do you clean or wash the plastic?
With a true color, the guy that taught me how to think about painting sold me the polyscale, not polyscale, but what was the other? Flow-quill. And he said, Nick, the nice thing about Flow-quill is you spray it on, it's organic, and you don't worry about washing, you just spray it. And I made the thought that, well, true color is also an organic based, has acetone in it, and acetone mixes well with water and organics. It's not hydrophobic nor particularly hydrophilic. And I just I don't handle the cars an awful lot or parts an awful lot before I spray them, but I just spray on the true color, and it hasn't caused me any problems. On the other hand, if I go across it with a fingernail or something sharp, whoops, I'll have it will pull that paint up.
Okay. And I think you mentioned that once you're done, use semi-gloss, or not semi-gloss, but you the finishing coat. You
I do. I put a mixture of I think I'm using 25% dull coat, 75% crystal clear, or the same testers, the gloss, and then taking that mixture and mixing it half with lacquer thinner and spraying it on, so it's really just a nice thin hard coat on top of the model. And at that point, if I go across it with my fingernail, nothing's going to happen. The decals are protected, and also I'm using Smokebox Graphics conspicuity FRA stickers on it, so that all that stays on. I think it stays on pretty well.
Oh, that's good. Well, I like that kind of project. It's a hell of a big project, but it sounds like fun. I guess once you do it once, you don't want to get into making a habit of making so many cars.
It's true, and the part that I enjoy most about a large project or multiple parts, multiple of the same parts, is you learn along the way. The first one I might make a mistake on, and might edit that out of the video, and by the time I'm finished up and I've done 20 of them, then it's time to start to run the video camera so that it looks smooth, but it's running smoother at that point too. There's definitely something to be said about doing a bunch. I started out as a chemist in a laboratory, and the best way to learn how to do a test was to do thousands of them. And by the time you had, like the guy said, by the time you have 10,000 hours, you're starting to be an expert on on what you're doing.
Well, time has run out. I want to thank you, Nick, and to let people know that there's a breakout room. So if you could come and join Nick, and if you have any other questions, you can ask him. So thank you very much, Nick, and that's it.
It's a pleasure meeting you today, Lloyd. Thank you all for coming, and I hope I showed you a little bit of something and didn't put you all to sleep. Have a good.
Welcome back, everyone. Our next clinician is, as the latest model railroad benchworking project now includes a sectional layout. The Baltimore and Ohio, Colorado, and Midland is in its beginning stages, and the framework is nearing completion. This is part one of the B&O CM build. Please welcome Jeff Reichel.
Good day, everybody. What you're going to see here very shortly is our video of building the Colorado Midland and Baltimore and Ohio Railroad for a very good friend of mine called Tom Greco. I met him at a Division III meeting, their NMRA here in North Texas. And this project is about 6 months old. We started with a drawing, worked our way over to CAD rail drawings, and eventually over into bench work. What you're about to see is the culmination of the starting of that process. And for the video guys, go ahead and start the video. Greetings and welcome to the build portion of the Colorado and Midland Railroad. I've already gotten started building the first section of the layout, but before we go into any detail, kind of show you where we wanted to start. So the first thing that we did is we have to start with a set of plans. Our plans for each section have been identified, have been drawn up, and you'll see that in a previous video. And then what I do is I actually cut the pieces to shape and actually assemble it together. And that's kind of what we're going to do today. The one that I'm going to work on today is what we call our Section B. And we'll see that as we move through it. It shows all the dimensions of all the pieces that we're going to need. So before we get started, let's take a look and see what we're going to use for our materials. So there's really only two types of materials that are going to be used on the Colorado Midland. The first one is this stuff here. This is called poplar. Poplar is going to be used for corner blocks. It's going to be used for angle brackets and things of that nature, mostly because of its durability, its strength, and that it can be cut literally in any form or format. I have two different sizes. I have a narrow and I have a large size. You can see what they put in. The second type that we're going to use is we're going to use a series of plywoods. You've seen this before. We're going to use this plywood here. This is a birch plywood. And it's supposed to measure out at 3/4, and it really measures at 0.66, which is actually not 3/4. So we have to take that into consideration when we start building the project. And I'll show you how to deal with that as we go through. The second type is what we're using for the top here. And the top here is actually 1/2-inch plywood. It actually measures out pretty good to 1/2 inch, so there's no difference there as far as when we apply it. The next thing that we're going to talk about here is the other materials that we're going to use to assemble. First thing that we're going to use is this little mechanism, and you may have seen this before in one of my previous videos. This is called a domino, and a domino is going to be used to actually attach the plywood to the blocks, and we'll show you how to do that. This acts like a little finger. Once you put glue and screws on it, it really doesn't come apart at all. You'll break your arm before you break the connection. To assemble everything, you're going to have a pocket screw that goes on the inside, and as if you notice down along the front, all the cross members, there are no valid actually have any of the screws that are shown at that point. Second type of screw that we're going to use is this type of screw. It's a star drive. It's actually a wood screw. It has sort of a medium grit or medium twist pattern to it. It has a star drive, and I pretty much use that on the top, and I have a couple of sizes. You could theoretically use these, which are drywall screws. They have a bugle head, and they drive down pretty well. If you can find the wood screws, they actually drive in a little bit easier and actually create a little bit of a divot if you need to go under the surface. So once we have all our materials defined, the next thing we need to define is what we're going to use for tools. Now I have a shop full of tools here. We'll show you different aspects of cutting material and so forth. You've seen that on previous videos. But a couple of things I actually want to show you. First is an accurate tape measure. One of the things to look for in a tape measure is actually this little piece here, which actually goes back and forth, and people wonder what this is for. So when I put a tape measure to a side and I'm using it this way, the measurement is from where the actual end of the piece is. If I use it in the opposite direction on the inside, it pushes the tape down to get an accurate measurement. That's why you never let the thing slap. You actually bring it all the way to the top and then you drop it in. So you never ruin that. So the tape measure is the first thing. The second thing I'm going to use is probably the thing that I most use more often than not is this little contraption. This is a square. I have a variety of sizes of squares depending on what I'm doing and how I'm going to be going through this. But the reason that I use this is because everything has to be square in order for it to match up directly to the drawings. So it has to be square in this direction, has to be square in this direction, that direction, and so forth. 1 degree off spanning the distance can mean anywhere from a 32nd to a 64th to an eighth, and in some cases even a 1/4 inch. So a good square accurately done is paramount, and this works with both the larger square and the smaller squares. Another type of square that I use is actually this one here. It goes over the end. I use it in a number of situations. One is if I'm cutting cross cut with my circular saw, or if I'm just spanning more than 6 inches. So I use that quite often. I use it to identify plumb, and it actually sits on itself. So if I have a board up next to it, or in this particular situation here, I can make sure that the thing is accurately squared. And as you can see, it actually is. The next type of tool that I'm going to use is something that looks like this. This is a bevel gauge. Now, this bevel gauge has a digital readout. It's not necessarily. Sometimes you get different type of angle finders and things of that nature, but a bevel gauge is something that is paramount. So for example, if I need to define a 45 or any other possible angle based on where I'm going, I'll put the gauge up to where it needs to be, tighten it down, and then I can use that setting over and over again. This is about a 93 degrees and so forth, so I can use that over and over again. And we've already used it on this particular module set. We'll show you that here in a minute. The other thing that I'm going to use a lot of are these guys, clamps. Now, the reason that I use clamp is for 2 reasons. One is I pull things together with it before I screw it down. Do not rely on screws to pull things together. You actually rely on screws to hold things together, not to pull them together. So use brute force or muscle via the clamps to actually pull the things together. Because if they don't go together with one of these, they're not going to go together with a screw anyway. The screws are only there as more or less clamping mechanisms. So I have a couple of sizes there. The next thing I have here is a caliper. And the reason I do this is for the reasons that we saw earlier. My drawing is calibrated to 3/4 of an inch. However, the plywood that I'm using is not 3/4 of an inch. If I put it up on the pliers, or put it up on the calipers, I'm actually looking at what was supposed to be 0.75 is actually 0.66. We'll show you how to deal with that once we get to it. The last thing that we're going to use is a set of drill drivers. These mechanical elements, as well as a saber saw if you're going to use on the curves, these are going to be driving all the screws, they'll be creating all the holes, and I pre-drill every hole to include a countersink. The final thing that we're going to use is this stuff, glue. Once everything is being put together and assembled, test fitted, the glue is the actual thing that holds everything together. So let me go ahead and clear all this off, and we'll take a closer look at this first module, what we call Section A. Okay, let's take a look at Section A. I brought the camera down and I'm going to go over some of the important aspects of Section A. If you take a look at the drawings and kind of look down to the end there, it's not a perfect square and it's not a perfect triangle. It's not a perfect anything. It's kind of an ad hoc configuration. You'll see down at the sides, there's no screw marks. There's no screw marks on the end. You'll see here that this is a big time angle. Down below, the legs are connected underneath cross braces, as you can see the blocks. And it goes all the way down to the other end. As we move across the top, the whole elevation happens to be at the same elevation. And of course, back at this end, we have another odd angle. And this one actually has a little bit of a surprise that it actually opens up on a hinge. And when it goes back together, there's a couple of locating pins and it goes back in the same spot. Let me set the camera back up and we'll go over some of the features that we have of this particular one. Okay, I want to go over this corner here because this is the most odd of the entire module here, or in this case I'm going to call it section A. Section A was drawn with a specific element in mind, and this is the section that we're looking at right here, which is up along the top. Starting at the beginning, this section here is literally a 90-degree angle. So I could take my square and identify a 90-degree angle. However, when I get to this piece here, I don't know what the angle is, so I'm going to get my bevel gauge out, and I can actually make that angle. Now there's two ways that I can calculate that. One is I can use the image itself to calculate that angle, or I can calculate the angle based on the block, and that's kind of what we did, which literally that angle is number 3 here, and that angle has been defined with all the measurements if you were looking top down. We'll show you how to do those. Other features that are associated with this particular aspect are the cross braces. So this cross brace is a little bit different than this cross brace because of where the blocks are, how long they are, how wide they are, and so forth. And we'll show you how we did those. Let me set the camera up on the other side and take you through that section. Okay, now we're looking down at the end of section A, and this particular end is actually going to connect. There'll be another piece on this side that actually connects into this section. Okay, it's going to come out this way and then actually curve to the right. So when you look at it, this is parallel to the room. The section is actually at an odd angle. Now, the issue here is how to define this particular angle. Now, what we did is we've drawn everything to actual size, and once I've identified the element, this actually is a 30-degree angle, and this element is its exact opposite, which is 30 degrees. The reason being is because when it comes out, this will actually be flat and parallel and kind of moving through. And that's what the section that we're building next is going to attach right here. It's going to go straight, and then it's going to start curving in that particular direction. We'll show you how to make these blocks, and once we've gone through that process, that's what we're going to do next. Let's take a look at the leggings for this system. The legs themselves are the exact same 1.5-inch blocks. They actually feed through a couple of pieces along with, I don't know if you can see inside here, there's also a block that actually spans that so that once I slide it in, it's automatic. Right now, they're not even being held in with bolts. They just slide in here. The stops here are a given height, so when the section comes down on it, it's actually sitting on these little blocks right here. That actually transfers the weight to the ground, and I have one the exact similar to the other side, the exact same size on both ends. If you look down at the other end, and we'll kind of move the camera that way, you will see that literally that particular section is not off. It's not in the center of the system. The reason being is because to keep the balance when the door is open, it has to be off to the right. We've actually calculated that based on the balance of the module itself. Also, you know that the end of that particular section is actually down 12.5 inches, and that's to account for the double hinge that's listed on there to take into consideration the extra weight. So what we did is these are in parallel. They're actually equidistant off the ends. The only difference is because that section of section A is wider, we've actually moved the legs over to stay within the right parallel. It seems to work out. The system is sitting with no problem, and it's not even connected to the sections right now. There'll be a bolt that actually goes through there, and it could be taken out. That's how we built the legs. They're connected with 2 pieces on both sides. They're obviously with pocket screws. They're extremely strong, and they're lightweight. Makes them very economical to build. Okay, let's take a look at how we get started with fabrication. There's a couple things I wanted to show you here. So where do we actually start? If you saw my video for Module 101, you saw me made a series of blocks. And these blocks are used in a number of situations. They're used on corners, they're used in field, they're used in the middle, they're used in the center, and their primary function is for strength. Now, how we make those blocks is we take 2 pieces of poplar, We actually glue them, clamp them together, let them dry overnight, cut them down, and we make this block. Now this block is a perfect 1.5 inch square. And I've taken the time to actually go through the process of making it square all 4 corners. And the reason being is because each of the corners might be used either for a field or a corner or an end, whatever the case may be. So that's the first thing, is that's where we're using the square, and we're checking all aspects of the blocks. Now, what happens when you get to a block that is not exactly square, it's got an angle in it? Well, that's where these come in. So if our premise is to be on an end of 1.5 inch, that's what this end is here. But obviously, to make a square, I need more than 1.5 inches. This is actually 2 1/16. So what happens is that once we glue 2 pieces together like this, which is what this is, we take our block and we cut out what we need. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, but how do we make the angles? Well, there's a couple of ways to make the angles. If I need a perfect 45, I split it in half, and then I start it at, for example, split the thing in half, and I start at 1.5 on each end, and then make the angle that way. I can use my bevel gauge, set at a 45 to do that, and so forth. Now, what happens with the odd angles? Well, on my plan, I have the ability to look at specific angles, and it's already been pre-measured via the AutoCAD drawings. So I could take the block and I could say, go this distance, 1.5, go this distance, 1.5, go this distance, 1.5. From here to here, I know is exactly 2 and 3/7/8 of an inch, and from here to here, and so forth. That's one easy way to do it. You could also follow the plan. But if you have all the dimensions on it, you can actually do this with a rule and the dimensions that are listed on the plan. However, get yourself a bevel gauge. This is a lot easier. So once I put it on, to find my bevel gauge at 45, in this case, that 45 is a 90. So that 45 that's listed in there, as long as that is perfect, that's going to be a 90. For the application that I'm going to use it for, we're going to be using these blocks, which are the what we call the corner 45s. So once we start putting those in place, then we can fabricate this. I can make as many of those as I actually need. Pretty straightforward. And if I have the profile, I can make a big long stick and just cut out what I need. Which leads me to the next thing, which is making sure that your cuts are perfect 90 degrees as well. If these aren't 90 degrees, then we have a problem. If they're off or skewed or something, a lot of times the things don't go together, or the top doesn't sit right, and so forth. So make sure you have your square as going through it. Okay? The next thing is dealing with tools. Make sure all of your tools are accurately tuned. And I'm going to set the camera up a little bit different to show you the table saw. So my table saw is something I use accurately across the board. So I want to make sure that it's accurately tuned. Let me kind of give you a couple indications. This blade actually rises up out of the table. Everybody knows how to do that. If that blade is not 90 degrees, and how you measure 90 degrees is pretty simple. Put this on, go against the blade. If I have a gap either at the top or the bottom, I have to adjust the angle of the blade, left or right, up or down, that actually moves that to get that back into 90. That is crucial to making sure that you get your 90 degrees on this. The other thing that you want to look for is your fence. Your fence goes along the side. Make sure that is exactly parallel to your blade. And how we do that is we take a measurement from the blade to the fence on the front and on the back. If it's not correct, that means your fence is askew, which means you have to get it back into alignment. That's the third thing. Next thing I look for is if I'm using a miter gauge, I check to make sure that that is at 90 degrees. And I also make sure that that is also at parallel to the blade, or in this case, it is perfectly 90 degrees to my blade. On the back of most miter slots, they'll actually have a indicator of what your angle is. Make sure that if it's set at 0, check it against your square, then set that back at 0. That's where your 0 mark is. And that's what you can use to reference at every given time. So those are basically the things I'm going to use for this particular build. Let's get the parts out and we'll get started. Okay, what I've done here is I've cut a number of parts based on my plan, how many I need of particular each size, and they are actually cut to length, they are cut to height, and they are cut exactly square. Okay, so those are my field pieces. These are all the plywood that we're going to be using for the field for our section here. There's a couple of pieces I have not cut yet, and then we'll talk about that in a second. All of the pieces have been cut for the outer frame and these two inner pieces right here. The reason being because those are all a given length, and I can deal with those. Notice that they don't connect one to another, they just connect to a block. So all I'm worried about is the distance from the ends. That's why I didn't cut the field. Now, I didn't cut these because remember I said that plywood isn't exactly 3/4 of an inch. So if I look at my plan, that number is based on a 3/4 inch piece of plywood. Well, if my plywood is not exactly 3/4 inch thick, I have to either add material. It's kind of tough to do when you don't know what that material length is until the pieces are actually built. So I haven't cut those yet. Also, in this particular situation, they're not listed on here, but the legs are actually going to sit in here. So those pieces are going to be cut to fit on that side. The first thing I did is I labeled every block. And that label corresponds to one of the blocks that I have here. And all I have to do is put things in order. So 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And that's what we'll do right now. So I'll say 1. There's all my numbers here. 2, 3, 4, 5. These blocks are now in their correct orientation. Now what happens here is that we have to fill in the field. So if I'm just going to make a mini version of this, of what it's supposed to look like.
That's what it'll end up looking like. Now you notice that there are different heights of blocks, and I've already taken that into consideration when I've actually gone through the plan. I know where all my elevations already are. In our Module 101 video, we built the elevations on site. In this case, the elevation's already been predetermined. Now all I need to do is feed in the pieces. So for example, 1 and 3, there is a piece that is 21 3/4, which is what this is. And that piece will actually go between 1 and 3. And that height, as you can see, is perfect. Now what I need to do is figure out what this called is the joinery. So I'll reset up for that. We'll take a look at that next. Okay, I brought the camera in a little bit tighter to show you what's going on in the next step of the process. My joinery for this is going to be using dominoes. Those are these little guys right here. The tool that's used to make these is called a domino joiner. It actually has a blade that pops out on the inside. In this case, it's 10 millimeters wide, and it goes back and forth as it drives through, making the domino shape itself. It's an expensive tool, so if you don't have one, it's not really necessary. You can still do the same thing with pocket screws and glue, and you can clamp them together. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we are going to make dominoes in different locations across the entire block structure. First thing we need to determine is how wide is this block? Well, it's actually 10 millimeters wide. Okay, well, that's not really too much of an inertia. So what I made a determination of, as long as I'm 3/4 inches down from the top and from the bottom, I can actually make them appropriately. So in this case, I'll set my gauge, in this case my square, to 3/4 of an inch, and then mark it. Now all I do is I mark it top and bottom. 1. Now, I know I'm going to put a line there because I'm going to make a hole right there. Pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. I'm going to make a mark here. Okay, now all I I need to do is transfer the line onto the wood. Easy peasy. And literally, that is where I'm going to make my 2 cuts. I'll show you how to do that here in a second. Get this absolutely correct. Inside. Now we'll go ahead and get this set up and we'll cut the holes and show you where we go to next. Now we're ready to cut the holes for the dominoes in here. But before we use any power tools, be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. Remember this, there's no more important thing than to wear these safety glasses. So what a domino joiner does is actually you put the line literally on your mark and you drive the tool into the wood. The tool itself has the ability to go against different angles. It has a protractor up on the top for whatever angle you want to do, all the way up to 90. So if I needed to, let's say, go to 45, I can actually raise it up to 45, and I'm going to do that later. But for right now, this one is at a 90. The tool itself, and I'm going to turn it on temporarily. When it comes out, it actually spins on the inside, creating the tool. Goes to a given distance. It goes to a given distance, and then from there, it's just a matter of applying the piece inside, and off you go. Let's go ahead and get her done. Okay, so as you can see, I've actually created the holes where they need to be from that tool. It's a perfect hole. It fits the domino perfectly. When you tap that in and add glue, it's going to be a really strong joint. Let me go ahead and do that now. I'm not going to add glue, we'll just do a quick dry fit. As you can see, there's no glue, and it is an extremely strong joint, even without glue. Once I put the glue on and clamp it, it'll never come apart. Got a whole bunch more to make. Stick around. Okay, last night I stayed and got all the holes cut in my blocks as well as my sides. Now I need to find a way to actually go ahead and connect the two pieces. Well, once the dominoes are in, I can use a clamp and clamp them together and wait for the glue to dry, but that would take too long. So I'm going to take another approach. I want to use pocket screws here. So pocket screws are going to lend me a little bit of strength, but they'll also use the pocket screw as a clamp while the glue dries. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm set up over here. Let me go ahead and move the camera and go from there. Okay, the next machine I'm going to use is this pocket hole jig. Now, what it does is it actually allows you to drill a pocket hole in the side of a board. What you do is you actually put your board inside the clamp it down, and drill your holes. Now, there are other pocket hole jigs that are on the market, a little less expensive. You can get one that actually fits on the side of a board itself, and with a clamp, you take your drill driver and drive your holes that way. Here's one that's designed for one at a time. You put it on there, clamp it appropriately, and put it there. But since I have the larger one, I'm going to use it. Now what I want to do is I want to stay clear of these two holes here. I also want to be on the inside of the board. Just make sure that your orientation is correct. And all you have to do is just line it up, clamp it down, and drive it home. Nothing to it.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. That's what I call construction. So let's see if we have any questions here. I'm sure we do. Okay, so Jeff, one big question here. What's the weight of one of those typical modules?
So the weight is going to be based on the size of it, as far as its length and width, as well as how much material is put in. Since we're using a maximum of 8-inch height, most of the sections that you see here are less than 25 pounds. Most of them are probably in the neighborhood of between 18 and 20, depending on the length. The one that we built initially, the one that you saw as part of the original build that we did, was 24 pounds. That was 8 foot long by 4 foot wide, and then it had its little cutout in the center. But it's designed to be taken apart, so it's the materials that you use determine how heavy something is going to be.
But that's just the framework, right?
That's just a framework.
Okay.
Remember, when you're going to be putting between 15 and 20 pounds of scenery on it with
Right.
either foam or screen or hard shell scenery or trees or buildings, all those kinds of things.
So the final weight would be around 40, 50 pounds, right?
That's correct. Just enough for one strong person, cut it, measure it again. And if it's not where it's supposed to be, take more of the line up. Most people try to split the line, and that's because that's what we try to do when we mark something. We're actually marking it to the same line designation as on the tape.
Well, that's a mistake I do pretty often. I never remember if I'm cutting on the outside or the inside or on.
I always try to split the line, because when I do my marking, I mark in the middle of the line when I'm marking it.
Okay. Another question was, is this domino joiner the latest craze? What happened to biscuit joining?
So biscuit joiners are about 5 or 6 years ahead of the domino joiner, and I think the person or the company that created the domino joiner wanted to take it a step further. Biscuit joinery has been around for some time. Its primary use is for cabinet making, which can be applied here. The difference between the two, one is a little bit thicker, but it's biscuit joiner's primary use is for alignment. And the biscuits that they use a wood called beechwood. So what happens in beechwood is once you put it inside there and you align your tools and align the pieces and put them together, that beechwood will actually expand, making it a little bit tighter. Well, domino, it still uses beechwood, but you can find them in walnut, you can find them in poplar, you can find them in a variety of other materials. But once it goes in, it's a little bit stronger hold and it's a little bit thicker. You can get them from 5 millimeters all the way up to 10 millimeter in thickness, and they extend from a small 5 millimeter all the way up to 50 millimeter and bigger if you're making doors. So it's a very versatile tool, because a biscuit joiner either has 3 different sizes. A domino actually has probably 30 different sizes that you can use depending on the application. While it's not a cheap tool, it is an expensive tool. It really is. But if you're making a lot of joints like this, they're extremely strong. If you're using a biscuit's always going to be from a 0 would be about that high, but a 30 would be about that high. On a 4-inch piece, you can only get 1 biscuit in here, which means that if I try to put a screw in anywhere, such as you saw in the video, using a pocket screw to hold things together, a lot of times you can't do that. You have to wait for the glue to dry. It'll work, you just have to wait for glue to dry.
Okay, so what's the name of that tool again?
It's called a Festool Domino. It's made by a company called Festool. They're out of, I believe, Germany. They're relatively expensive tools, but they're very accurate and built specifically for, I don't want to say the professional, but it's between the amateur professional and the professional woodworker. It's designed to make your life easier for certain types of cuts. They have track saws and routers and different jigs set up for those kinds of things to make life a little bit easier. They're very accurate tools.
Okay, I'm just checking to see if there's any other questions. There's one I was going to ask, is that there's so many types of plywood out there. Is there a special plywood that you're using?
It's not really special. It's more economical. In this particular situation, I'm looking to build a framework. Much like if somebody builds a wall inside the house. In this case, if I build a wall inside the house, as long as the 2x4s are all accurate, you put the wall up, you slap, you know, a facing on it, such as drywall or something, and you never see the wall. Well, in our case, we're building a framework. We sanded it down nice and smooth and painted it. It works just fine. The difference here is the number of plies in the plywood. The more number of plies, the heavier the plywood's going to be, but it's also the stronger it's going to be. Plywood is essentially made up with a series of wood that overlap on each other on a crosshatch. That's what makes the plywood actually strong. The more crosshatches you have, the more strength you get out of there. There's MDF core plywood, which has an MDF core. It's a little bit stronger, but it's a little more accurate as far as size is concerned. So 3/4 inch piece of plywood is 3/4 inch piece. You have multi-core plywoods, and you even have zero void or cabinet grade plywoods, which are a little bit heavier, but there might be up to 15 different layers, and usually a premium surface on both ends. For what we're trying to do, we try to go from an economical point of view. It actually does the same thing. Since we paint it, it actually has a pretty good view on it. Looks pretty good too when it's done.
I noticed at the beginning you were working with a plan, right? So somebody comes up and says, this is what I'd like to achieve. So you guys go into a process of designing and...
Yeah, we've gone through, there's a gentleman by the name of David Mock that I work with very closely, and he is a wizard when it comes to drawing information with the AutoCAD. If you don't know anybody who knows how to do that, go find somebody who knows how to do that, might be able to draw it for you. The reason being is because even building any kind of framing, most woodworkers require some sort of plan to make sure that it comes out accurately. A lot of times we build in place certain specific things, but still it requires, hey, I got to draw this out, draw that out. In the model industry, a lot of times we don't do that. So sometimes we're actually having to try to finagle certain things together. The best example is if you go to a railroad show and you get to see the guys putting modules together. A lot of times they don't fit, they're gapped or something like that, and they're trying to struggle to put them together. So what we try to do is we try to draw everything out, everything from the framing to the track to the sub-road bed, where the wires are going to be. So when you saw in the video, when it was in its final destination, that's the first time all the pieces were together. And we found out that after doing so, you saw a small gap along the back. That's because the measurement that we got from the original drawing was 14 inches on the nose wrong. And that's the gap that you have a 3-inch difference from one side of the layout to the other if you really needed to go there. But essentially, that's it. The only difference between the H legs is how wide they are. So some are very narrow based on the section that it supports. Some are very wide based on the section it supports. But they're all symmetrical. So one side and the other side of the legs for that particular section are identical. So they fit either way. The advantage that we have there is that we can put a shelf on top of that and use that for extra storage if we need to. But they're removable. They come out with one screw.
Here's another question. My layout is 7x10 and with 6 2x4 legs that are bolted to cross members. What's the best way to brace the legs and eliminate any side-to-side movement of the layout?
Well, that's a tough question. So what we do is we try to look at it from a balance point of view, and you have to look at it from the top down. If you go to a railroad show, and you'll actually see this where modules are put together, people clamp the legs on with C-clamps on the end of modules. If you look at the center of that module, 9 times out of 10, you see a little bit of a dip in there. That's because the legs back, the weight, and where the leg is, the module is supported is on the outside. Kind of like when you have a shelf in, let's say, one of your cabinets. If you look at the center, it's usually duped down. It's just because it doesn't have any support. So what we try to do with our legs is we try to vary them between a 1/3 in or a 1/4 in from both the front and edge facing and from the outside facing. That's where we want the general support to be. The second piece is we want to support it not from one edge, like inside here. We want to support it two different ways. And that's why we make an extra cross member so that it's being supported on basically an I-beam, just like you would in your house, and then support the entire structure that way. So it's being supported this way, then on the face and the reverse, it's being supported that way, and then that supports the rest of the layout. The blocks actually make all the thing for us. And the reason being is because the blocks provide extra linear support on the Z-axis, which doesn't allow the drooping that you see with a lot of modules. So in our sectional, the reason we kept everything less than 30 inches as far as lengthwise is we don't have any drooping. So our legs support in that section are actually done very well. Since it's in from both the front and the back and the side and out, it works just fine.
Okay. Another question here, going back to the Domino biscuit. Do you use the Domino biscuit in the legs as well?
I do. So all the H-frames are those pieces inside there. I've used those in there. But when I connect them into, the legs can actually be taken out. They fit inside basically a hole that's the exact size of the leg. So when it's in and put down, it can't move left, right, or up or down, or in or out. So it just basically slides into a pocket. Once it's in place, it doesn't go anywhere.
Another question is, and this one, I presume there's different answers, or anyway, how do you join two sections together when making up a layout?
So there's a number of ways to do it, but I use alignment pins. If it is a permanent layout that only might be taken down, once or twice in its lifetime, I'll use a metal pin with a just, 3/8 inch dowel pin, just a metal pin. And then outside of that, I use a couple of T-nuts on the backside just to hold everything together. If everything is built correctly, those faces should align without any gaps. It's just a matter of holding them together. The alignment pins just are in place so that when I tighten it down, it just stays aligned. That's all it is. If I'm doing something like on a module where I'm going to take it apart, quite often, I use a set of brass pattern makers dowels. They're called alignment pins that once they go into a 7/16 hole, you can put them in and out as much as you want. It'll never ruin the wood. The problem is the wood, as it expands and contracts, will loosen over time. And any of you who've seen a loose screw, that's probably what's happened. So in this case, if I use a brass pin or I use a metal pin, a dowel pin, it holds the thing in place, and then just putting screws between them on a T-nut holds everything together.
I've seen some people use clamps. What do you think about,
I'm not in favor of clamps for two reasons. One is, in order for clamps to work, you have to use what they call brute force. Now, the brute force, the more you do it, the fibers of the wood tend to come out of alignment of what they were when they were originally cut. In order to put something together and you try to keep clamping it, in order to get it back into alignment, you have to use more force, which aggravates the problem worse. And I take you back to our friends over at Model Railroad Shows trying to put a 1/4 inch gap and crank it back together. Wood doesn't move that much. If you can avoid C-clamps, please do so. The only time I use those type of clamps is during the initial fabrication. I'm not using it for locking something together, because under warpage or things like that, in order to get something back together, you're making the problem even worse, and it's just going to be exacerbated in the future. So avoid C-clamps if you can. If you look at my first two videos on Railroad Module 101, I get away from C-clamps and I show you how to put those together the other way.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time. I want to thank you, Jeff. And if people want to join him in the breakout rooms, he's going to be there for a while. And now we're going to take a 3-hour break, and we will be back. And the next clinic might start earlier, so all you have to do is rewind if you are late. So we will see you in about 3 hours. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, guys.